Section 17 of Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal, by Edmondo de AMICIS. Translated by Isabel Florence HAPGOOD. April, Part 3. Convalescence. Thursday, 20th. Who could have told me, when I returned from that delightful trip with my father, that for 10 days I should not see the country or the sky again? I have been very ill, in danger of my life. I have heard my mother sobbing. I have seen my father very, very pale, gazing intently at me, and my sister Sylvia and my brother talking in a low voice, and the doctor with his spectacles who was there every moment, and who said things to me that I did not understand. In truth, I have been on the verge of saying a final farewell to everyone. Oh, my poor mother! I passed 3 or 4 days at least of which I recollect almost nothing, as though I had been in a dark and perplexing dream. I thought I beheld at my bedside my kind schoolmistress of the upper primary, who was trying to stifle her cough in her handkerchief in order not to disturb me. In the same manner I confusedly recall my teacher, who bent over to kiss me, and who pricked my face a little with his beard. And I saw, as in a mist, the red head of Crossi, the golden curls of Derossi, the Calabrian clad all in black, all pass by, and Garrone, who brought me a mandarin orange with its leaves, and ran away in haste because his mother is ill. Then I awoke, as from a very long dream, and understood that I was better from seeing my father and mother smiling, and hearing Sylvia singing softly. Oh, what a sad dream it was! Then I began to improve every day. The little mason came and made me laugh once more for the first time, with his hare's face. And how well he does it, now that his face is somewhat lengthened through illness, poor fellow! And Coretti came, and Garoffi came to present me with 2 tickets in his new Lottery of a Penknife with 5 surprises, which he purchased of a second-hand dealer in the Via Bertola. Then yesterday, while I was asleep, Precossi came and laid his cheek on my hand without waking me. And as he came from his father's workshop, with his face covered with coal dust, he left a black print on my sleeve, the sight of which caused me great pleasure when I awoke. How green the trees have become in these few days, and how I envy the boys whom I see running to school with their books, when my father carries me to the window. But I shall go back there soon myself. I am so impatient to see all the boys once more, and my seat, the garden, the streets, to know all that has taken place during the interval, to apply myself to my books again, and to my copy-books, which I seem not to have seen for a year. How pale and thin my poor mother has grown! Poor father, how weary he looks! And my kind companions who came to see me, and walked on tiptoe and kissed my brow. It makes me sad even now to think that one day we must part. Perhaps I shall continue my studies with Derossi and with some others, but how about all the rest? When the 4th grade is once finished, then good-bye. We shall never see each other again. I shall never see them again at my bedside when I am ill. Garrone, Precossi, Coretti, who are such fine boys, and kind and dear comrades. Never more. Friends among the working men. Thursday, 20th. Why never more, Enrico? That will depend on yourself. When you have finished the 4th grade, you will go to the high school, and they will become working men. But you will remain in the same city for many years, perhaps. Why, then, will you never meet again? When you are in the University of the Lyceum, you will seek them out in their shops or their workrooms, and it will be a great pleasure for you to meet the companions of your youth once more, as men at work. I should wonder to see you neglecting to look up Coretti or Precossi wherever they may be. And you will go to them, and you will pass hours in their company, and you will see, when you come to study life and the world, how many things you can learn from them, which no one else is capable of teaching you, both about their arts and their society and your own country. And have a care, for if you do not preserve these friendships, it will be extremely difficult for you to acquire other similar ones in the future. Friendships, I mean to say, outside of the class to which you belong, and thus you will live in one class only, and the man who associates with but one social class is like the student who reads but one book. Let it be your firm resolve, then, from this day forth, that you will keep these good friends even after you shall be separated, and from this time forth cultivate precisely these by preference, because they are the sons of working men. You see, men of the upper classes are the officers, and men of the lower classes are the soldiers of toil, And thus in society, as in the army, not only is the soldier no less noble than the officer, since nobility consists in work and not in wages, in valor and not in rank, but if there is also a superiority of merit, it is on the side of the soldier, of the workmen, who draw the lesser profit from the work. Therefore, love and respect above all others among your companions the sons of the soldiers of labor. Honor in them the toil and the sacrifices of their parents. Disregard the differences of fortune and of class, upon which the base alone regulate their sentiments and courtesy. Reflect that from the veins of laborers in the shops and in the country issued nearly all that blessed blood which has redeemed your country. Love Garrone, love Coretti, love Precossi, love your little mason, who in their little working men's breasts possess the hearts of princes, and take an oath to yourself that no change of fortune shall ever wipe out these friendships of childhood from your soul. Swear to yourself that 40 years hence, if while passing through a railway station you recognize your old Garrone in the garments of an engineer, with a black face, I cannot think what to tell you to swear. I am sure that you will jump upon the engine and fling your arms round his neck, though you were even a senator of the kingdom. Your father. Garrone's mother, Saturday, 29th. On my return to school, the first thing I heard was some bad news. Garrone had not been there for several days because his mother was seriously ill. She died on Saturday. Yesterday morning, as soon as we came into school, the teacher said to us, "The greatest misfortune that can happen to a boy has happened to poor Garrone. His mother is dead. He will return to school tomorrow. I beseech you, boys, respect the terrible sorrow that is now rending his soul. When he enters, greet him with affection and gravely. Let no one jest, let no one laugh at him, I beg of you." And this morning, poor Garrone came in, a little later than the rest. I felt a blow at my heart at the sight of him. His face was haggard, his eyes were red, and he was unsteady on his feet. It seemed as though he had been ill for a month. I hardly recognized him. He was dressed all in black. He aroused our pity. No one even breathed. All gazed at him. No sooner had he entered than at the first sight of that schoolroom, whither his mother had come to get him nearly every day, of that bench over which she had bent on so many examination days to give him a last bit of advice, and where he had so many times thought of her, in his impatience to run out and meet her, he burst into a desperate fit of weeping. The teacher drew him aside to his own place and pressed him to his breast, and said to him, "Weep, weep, my poor boy, but take courage. Your mother is no longer here, but she sees you. She still loves you. She still lives by your side, and one day you will behold her once again, for you have a good and noble soul like her own. Take courage." Having said this, he accompanied him to the bench near me. I dared not look at him. He drew out his copybooks and his books, which he had not opened for many days, and as he opened the reading book at a place where there was a cut representing a mother leading her son by the hand, he burst out crying again, and laid his head on his arm. Their master made us a sign to leave him thus, and began the lesson. I should have liked to say something to him, but I did not know what. I laid one hand on his arm and whispered in his ear, "Don't cry, Garrone." He made no reply, and without raising his head from the bench, he laid his hand on mine and kept it there a while. At the close of school no one spoke to him. All hovered round him respectfully and in silence. I saw my mother waiting for me, and ran to embrace her, but she held me back, and gazed at Garrone. For the moment I could not understand why, but then I saw that Garrone was standing apart by himself and looking at me, and he had a look of indescribable sadness, which seemed to say, "You are embracing your mother, and I shall never embrace mine again. You still have a mother, and mine is dead." And then I knew why my mother had thrust me back, and I went out without taking her hand. Giuseppe Mazzini, Saturday, 29th. This morning also Garrone came to school with a pale face and his eyes swollen with weeping, and he hardly cast a glance at the little gifts which we had placed on his desk to console him. But the teacher had brought a page from a book to read to him, in order to encourage him. He first informed us that we are to go to-morrow at 1 o'clock to the town hall, to witness the award of the medal for civic valor to a boy who has saved a little child from the Po, and that on Monday he will dictate the description of the festival to us instead of the monthly story. Then, turning to Garrone, who was standing with drooping head, he said to him, "Make an effort, Garrone, and write down what I dictate to you as well as the rest." We all took our pens, and the teacher dictated. Giuseppe Mazzini was born in Genoa in 1805 and died in Pisa in 1872, a grand, patriotic soul, the mind of a great writer, the first inspirer and apostle of the Italian Revolution, who, out of love for his country, lived for 40 years poor, exiled, persecuted, a fugitive heroically steadfast in his principles and in his resolutions. Giuseppe Mazzini, who adored his mother, and who derived from her all that there was noblest and purest in her strong and gentle soul, wrote as follows to a faithful friend of his to console him in the greatest of misfortunes. These are almost his exact words: "My friend, you will never more behold your mother on this earth. That is the terrible truth. I do not attempt to see you, because yours is one of those solemn and sacred sorrows which each must suffer and conquer for himself. Do you understand what I mean to convey by the words, one must conquer sorrow? Conquer the least sacred, the least purifying part of sorrow, that which, instead of rendering the soul better, weakens and debases it. But the other part of sorrow, the noble part, that which enlarges and elevates the soul, that must remain and never leave you more. Nothing here below can take the place of a good mother. In griefs, in the consolations which life may still bring you, you will never forget her, but you must recall her, love her, mourn her death, in a manner which is worthy of her. Oh, my friend, hearken to me. Death exists not. It is nothing. It cannot even be understood. Life is life, and it follows the law of life, progress. Yesterday you had a mother on earth. Today you have an angel elsewhere. All that is good will survive the life of the earth with increased power. Hence also the love of your mother. She loves you now more than ever, and you are responsible for your actions to her more even than before. It depends upon you, upon your actions, to meet her once more, to see her in another existence. You must therefore, out of love and reverence for your mother, grow better, and cause her to joy for you. Henceforth you must say at every act, "Would my mother approve this?" Her transformation has placed a guardian angel in the world for you, to whom you must refer in all your affairs, in everything that pertains to you. Be strong and brave. Fight against desperate and vulgar grief. Have the tranquillity of great suffering in great souls, and that is what she would have. Garrone, added the teacher, be strong and tranquil, for that is what she would have. Do you understand? Garrone nodded assent, while great and fast-flowing tears streamed over his hands, his copybook, and his desk. Civic Valor, Monthly Story. At 1 o'clock we went with our schoolmaster to the front of the town hall to see the medal for civic valor bestowed on the lad who had saved one of his comrades from the Po. On the front terrace waved a huge tri-colored flag. We entered the courtyard of the palace. It was already full of people. At the further end of it was visible a table with a red cover and papers on it, and behind it a row of gilded chairs for the mayor and the council. The ushers of the municipality were there, with their under waistcoats of sky blue and their white stockings. To the right of the courtyard a detachment of policemen, who had a great many medals, was drawn up in a line, and beside them a detachment of custom-house officers. On the other side were the firemen in festive array, and numerous soldiers, not in line, who had come to look on, cavalrymen, sharpshooters, artillerymen. Then all around were gentlemen, country people, and some officers and women and boys who had assembled. We crowded into a corner where many scholars from other buildings were already collected with their teachers. Near us was a group of boys between 10 and 18 years of age, belonging to the common people, who were talking and laughing loudly, and we made out that they were all from Borgo Po, comrades or acquaintances of the boy who was to receive the medal. Above, all the windows were thronged with the employees of the city government. The balcony of the library was also filled with people, who pressed against the balustrade, and in the one on the opposite side, which is over the entrance gate, stood a crowd of girls from the public schools, and many daughters of soldiers with their pretty blue veils. It looked like a theatre. All were talking merrily, glancing every now and then at the red table, to see whether anyone had made his appearance. A band of music was playing softly at the end of the portico. The sun beat down on the lofty walls. It was beautiful. All at once, everyone began to clap their hands, from the courtyard, from the balconies, from the windows. I raised myself on tiptoe to look. The crowd which stood behind the red table had parted, and a man and a woman had come forward. The man was leading a boy by the hand. This was the lad who had saved his comrade. The man was his father, a mason, dressed in his best. The woman, his mother, small and blonde, had on a black gown. The boy, also small and blonde, had on a grey jacket. At the sight of all those people, and at the sound of that thunder of applause, all three stood still, not daring to look or move. A municipal usher pushed them along to the side of the table on the right. All remained quiet for a moment, and then, once more, the applause broke out on all sides. The boy glanced up at the windows, and then at the balcony with the daughters of soldiers. He held his cap in his hand, and he did not seem to understand very thoroughly where he was. It struck me that he looked a little like Coretti in the face, but he was redder. His father and mother kept their eyes fixed on the table. In the meantime, all the boys from Borgo Po who were near us were making motions to their comrade, to attract his attention, and hailing him in a low tone. "Pin! Pin! Peanut!" At last they made themselves heard. The boy glanced at them and hid his smile behind his cap. At a certain moment the guards drew themselves up to attention. The mayor entered, accompanied by numerous gentlemen. The mayor, all white with a big tri-coloured scarf, placed himself beside the table, standing. All the others took their places behind and beside him. The band ceased playing, the mayor made a sign, and everyone grew quiet. He began to speak. I did not understand the first words perfectly, but I gathered he was telling the story of the boy's feat. Then he raised his voice, and it rang out so clear and sonorous through the whole court that I did not lose another word. When he saw from the shore his comrades struggling in the river, already overcome with fear of death, he tore the clothes from his back and hastened to his assistance without hesitating an instant. They shouted to him, "You will be drowned." He made no reply. They caught hold of him. He freed himself. They called him by name. He was already in the water. The river was swollen, the risk terrible even for a man. But he flung himself to meet death with all the strength of his little body and his great heart. He reached the unfortunate fellow and seized him just in time, when he was already under water, and dragged him to the surface. He fought furiously with the waves, which strove to overwhelm him, with his companion who tried to cling to him, and several times he disappeared beneath the water, and rose again with a desperate effort. Obstinate, invincible in his purpose, not like a boy who is trying to save another boy, but like a man, like a father who is struggling to save his son, who is his hope and his life. In short, God did not permit so generous a prowess to be displayed in vain. The child swimmer tore the victim from the gigantic river and brought him to land, and with the assistance of others rendered him his first succour, after which he returned home quietly and alone, and ingenuously narrated his deed. Gentlemen, beautiful and worthy of veneration is heroism in a man. But in a child, in whom there can be no prompting of ambition or of profit whatever, in a child who must have all the more ardour in proportion as he has less strength, in a child from whom we require nothing, who is bound to nothing, who already appears to us so noble and lovable, not when he acts, but when he merely understands, and is grateful for the sacrifices of others, in a child, heroism is divine. I will say nothing more, gentlemen. I do not care to deck with superfluous praises such simple grandeur. Here before you stands the noble and valorous rescuer. Soldiers, greet him as a brother. Mothers, bless him like a son. Children, remember his name, engrave on your minds his visage, that it may never more be erased from your memories and from your hearts. Approach, my boy. In the name of the King of Italy, I give you the medal for civic valor. An extremely loud hurrah, uttered at the same moment by many voices, made the palace ring. The mayor took the medal from the table and fastened it on the boy's breast. Then he embraced and kissed him. The mother placed one hand over her eyes, the father held his chin on his breast. The mayor shook hands with both, and taking the decree of decoration, which was bound with a ribbon, he handed it to the woman. Then he turned to the boy again and said, "May the memory of this day, which is such a glorious one for you, such a happy one for your father and mother, keep you all your life in the path of virtue and honor. Farewell." The mayor withdrew, the band struck up, and everything seemed to be at an end, when the detachment of firemen opened, and the lad of 8 or 9 years, pushed forwards by a woman, who instantly concealed herself, rushed towards the boy with the decoration, and flung himself in his arms. Another outburst of hurrahs and applause made the courtyard echo. Everyone had instantly understood that this was the boy who had been saved from the Po, and who had come to thank his rescuer. After kissing him, he clung to one arm, in order to accompany him out. These two, with the father and mother following behind, took their way towards the door, making a path with difficulty among the people who formed in line to let them pass. Policemen, boys, soldiers, women, all mingled together in confusion. All pressed forwards and raised on tiptoe to see the boy. Those who stood near him as he passed touched his hand. When he passed before the schoolboys, they all waved their caps in the air. Those from Borgo Po made a great uproar, pulling him by the arms and by his jacket, and shouting, "Pin! Hurrah for Pin! Bravo, Pinot!" I saw him as he passed very close to me. His face was all aflame and happy. His medal had a red, white, and green ribbon. His mother was crying and smiling. His father was twirling his moustache with one hand, which quivered violently as though he had a fever. And from the windows and the balconies the people continued to lean out and applaud. All at once, when they were on the point of entering the portico, there fell from the balcony of the Daughters of Soldiers a veritable shower of pansies, of bunches of violets and daisies, which dropped upon the head of the boy, and of his father and mother, and scattered over the ground. Many people stooped to pick them up and hand them to the mother, and the band at the further end of the courtyard played, very, very softly, a most entrancing air, which seemed like a song by a great many silvery voices, fading slowly into the distance on the banks of a river. End of section 17.
Section 18 of Heart, A Schoolboy's Journal. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kristin Lewis, Houston, Texas. Heart, A Schoolboy's Journal by Edmondo de Amicis. Translated by Isabel, Florence, HAPGOOD. May. Children with the Rickets. Friday the 5th. Today I took a vacation because I was not well, and my mother took me to the Institute for Children with the Rickets, whither she went to recommend a child belonging to our porter, but she did not allow me to go into the school. Did you not understand, Enrico, why I did not permit you to enter? It was in order not to place before the eyes of those unfortunate, there in the midst of the school, as though on exposition, a strong, healthy boy. They have already but too many opportunities for making painful comparisons. What a sad thing! Tears rushed from my heart when I went in. There were 60 of them, boys and girls. Poor tortured bones, poor hands, poor little shriveled and distorted feet, poor little deformed bodies. I found many charming faces with eyes full of intelligence and affection. There was one little child's face with a pointed nose and a sharp chin of an old woman, but it wore a smile of celestial sweetness. Some, viewed from the front, are handsome, and appear to be without defects, but when they turn round, they cast a weight upon your soul. The doctor was there, visiting them. He set them upright on their benches, and pulled up their little garments to fill their swollen stomachs and enlarged joints. But they did not show the least shame. Poor creatures! It was evident that they were children who were used to being undressed, examined, turned round on all sides, and to think that they are now in the best stages of their malady, when they hardly suffer at all any more. But who can say what they suffered during the first stage, while their bodies were undergoing the process of deformation, when with the increase of their infirmity they saw affection decrease around them? Poor children saw themselves left alone for hour after hour in a corner of the room or the courtyard, badly nourished, and at times scoffed at or tormented for months by bandages and by useless orthopedic apparatus. Now, however, thanks to care and good food and gymnastic exercise, many are improving. Their schoolmistress makes them practice gymnastics. It was a pitiful sight to see them, at a certain command, extend all those bandaged legs under the benches, squeezed as they were between splints, knotty and deformed, limbs which should have been covered with kisses. Some could not rise from the bench, but remained there, with their heads resting on their arms, stroking their crutches with their hands. Others, on making the thrust with their arms, felt their breaths fail them, and fell back on their seats, pale but smiling, to conceal their panting. Ah, Enrico, you other children do not prize your good health, and it seems to you so small a thing to be well. I thought of the strong and thriving lads, whom their mothers carry about in triumph, proud of their beauty. I could have clasped all those poor little heads. I could have pressed them to my heart in despair. I could have said, had I been alone, I will never stir from here again. I wish to consecrate my life to you, to serve you, to be a mother to you all, to my last day. And in the meantime they sang in peculiar, thin, sweet, sad voices, which penetrated the soul. When their teacher praised them, they looked happy, and as she passed among the benches, they kissed her hands and wrist, for they are very grateful for what is done for them, and very affectionate. These little angels have good minds, and study well, the teacher told me. The teacher is young and gentle, with a face full of kindness, but with a certain expression of sadness, like a reflection of the misfortunes which she caresses and comforts. Dear girl, among all the human creatures who earn their livelihood by frail, there is not one who earns it more holier than you. Your mother. Sacrifice, Tuesday, 9th. My mother is good, and my sister Sylvia is like her, and has a large and noble heart. Yesterday evening I was copying a part of the monthly story, from the Apennines to the Andes, which the teacher has given out to us, all in small portions to copy, because it is so long, when Sylvia entered on tiptoe and said to me hastily, and in a low voice, "Come to mamma with me. I heard her and papa talking together this morning. Some affair has gone wrong with papa, and he was sad. Mamma was encouraging him. We are in difficulties, do you understand? We have no more money. Papa said that it would be necessary to make sacrifices in order to recover himself. Now we must make sacrifices too, must we not? Are you ready to do it? Well, I will speak to mamma. And do you agree and promise her on your honor that you will do everything that I shall say?" So saying, she took me by the hand and led me to our mother, who was sewing, lost in thought. I sat down on one end of the sofa, Sylvia on the other, and she immediately began. "Listen, mamma, I have something to say to you. Both of us have something to say to you." Mamma stared at us in surprise, and Sylvia began. "Papa has no money, has he?" "What do you mean?" replied mamma, turning crimson. "Has he not indeed? What do you know about it? Who has told you?" "I know it," said Sylvia resolutely. "Well, then, listen, mamma. We must make some sacrifices too. You promised me a fan at the end of May, and Enrico was expecting his box of paints. We don't want anything now. We don't want to waste a soldo. We shall be just as well pleased, you know." Mamma tried to speak, but Sylvia said, "No, it must be this way. We have decided, and until papa has money again, we don't want any fruit or anything else. Broth will be enough for us, and we will eat bread in the morning for breakfast. So we shall spend less on the table, for we already spend too much, and we promise you that you will always find us perfectly contented. Is it not so, Enrico?" I replied that it was. "Always as contented," repeated Sylvia, closing mamma's mouth with one hand. "And if there are any other sacrifices to be made, either in the matter of clothing or anything else, we will make them gladly. We would even sell our presents. I would give up all my things and serve you as your maid. We will not have anything done out of the house any more. I will work all day long with you. I will do everything you wish. I am ready for anything, she exclaimed, throwing her arms around my mother's neck. If Papa and Mamma can only be saved further troubles, if I can only see you both once more at ease and in good spirits, as in former days, between your Sylvia and your Enrico, who love you so dearly, who would give their lives for you. Ah, I have never seen my mother so happy as she was on hearing these words. She never before kissed us on the brow in that way, weeping and laughing and unable to speak. Then she assured Sylvia that she had not understood rightly, that we were not in the least reduced circumstances, as she imagined, and she thanked us 100 times and was cheerful all the evening until my father came in. When she told him all about it, he did not open his mouth, poor father. But this morning, as we sat at the table, I felt at once both a great pleasure and a great sadness. Under my napkin I found my box of colors, and under hers Sylvia found her fan. The Fire, Thursday, 9th. This morning I had finished copying my share of the story, from the Apennines to the Andes, and was seeking for a theme for the original composition, which the teacher had assigned us to write, when I heard an unusual talking on the stairs, and shortly after 2 firemen entered the house, and asked permission of my father to inspect the stoves and chimneys, because a chimney was on fire on the roof, and they could not tell to whom it belonged. My father said, "Pray do so," and although we had no fire burning anywhere, they began to make the round of our apartments, and to lay their ears to the walls, to hear if the fires were roaring in the flues, which run up to the other floors of the house. While they were going through the rooms, my father said to me, "Here is the theme for your composition, Enrico, the fireman. Try to write down what I am about to tell you." I saw them at work 2 years ago. One evening, when I was coming out of the Balbo Theatre late at night, on entering the Via Roma, I saw an unusual light and a crowd of people collecting. A house was on fire. Tongues of flame and clouds of smoke were bursting from the windows and the roof. Men and women appeared at the windows and then disappeared, uttering shrieks of despair. There was a dense throng in front of the door. The crowd was shouting, "They will be burned alive! Help! The firemen!" At that moment a carriage arrived. 4 firemen sprang out of it, the first who had reached the town hall, and rushed into the house. They had already gone in when a horrible thing happened. A woman ran to a window of the 3rd story with a scream, clutched the balcony, climbed down it, and remained thus clinging, almost suspended in space, with her back outwards, bending beneath the flames, which flashed out from the room and almost licked her hand. The crowd uttered a cry of horror. The firemen, who had been stopped on the 2nd floor by mistake by the terrified lodgers, had already broken through a wall and into a room, when 100 shouts gave them warning. "On the 3rd floor! On the 3rd floor!" They flew to the 3rd floor. There they found an infernal uproar, beams from the roof crashing in, corridors filled with a suffocating smoke. In order to reach the rooms where the lodgers were imprisoned, there was no other way left but to pass over the roof. They instantly sprang upon it, and a moment later something which resembled a black phantom appeared on the tiles, in the midst of the smoke. It was the corporal of the firemen, who had been the first to arrive. But in order to get from the roof to the small set of rooms cut off by the fire, he was forced to pass over an extremely narrow space between a dormer window and the eaves trowel. All the rest was in flames, and that tiny space was covered with snow and ice, and there was no place to hold on. "'Tis impossible for him to pass!" shouted the crowd below. The corporal advanced along the edge of the roof. All shuddered and began to observe him with bated breath. He passed. A tremendous hurrah rose toward the heavens. The corporal resumed his way, and on arriving at the point which was threatened, he began to break away with furious blows of his axe, beams, tiles, and rafters, in order to open a hole through which to descend into the house. Meanwhile the woman was hanging outside the window. The fire raged with increased violence over her head. Another moment and she would have fallen into the street. The hole was opened. We saw the corporal pull off his shoulder belt and lower himself inside. The other firemen who had arrived followed. At that instant a very lofty portaladder, which had just arrived, was placed against the house in front of the windows, whence issued flames. And maniacal howls, but it seemed as though they were too late. "No one can be saved now," they shouted. "The firemen are burning. The end has come. They are dead." All at once the black form of a corporal came in sight of the window, with the balcony lighted up by the flames overhead. The woman clasped him around the neck. He caught her with both arms, drew her up, and laid her down inside the room. The crowd set up a shout, 1,000 voices strong, which rose above the roar of the conflagration. But the others, and how were they to get down? The ladder, which leaned against the roof on the front of another window, was at a good distance from them. How could they get a hold of it? While the people were saying this to themselves, one of the firemen stepped out of the window, set his right foot on the window sill, and his left on the ladder, standing thus upright in the air. He grasped the lodgers one after the other, as the other men handed them to him from within, passed them on to their comrade who had climbed up from the street, and who, after securing a firm grasp for them on the rungs, sent them down one after the other, with the assistance of more firemen. First came the woman who had clung to the balcony, then a baby, then another woman, then an old man. All were saved. After the old man, the fireman who had remained inside descended. The last to come down was the corporal who had been the first to hasten up. The crowd received them all with a burst of applause, but when the last made his appearance, the vanguard of the rescuers, the one who had faced the abyss in advance of the rest, the one who would have perished had it been fated that one should perish, the crowd saluted him like a conqueror, shouting and stretching out their arms with an affectionate impulse of admiration and of gratitude, and in a few minutes his obscured name, Giuseppe Robino, rang from 1,000 throats. Have you understood? That is courage, the courage of the heart, which does not reason, which does not waver, which dashes blindly on like a lightning flash, wherever it hears the cry of a dying man. One of these days I will take you to the exercises of the firemen, and I will point out to you Corporal Robino, for you would be very glad to know him, would you not? I replied that I should. Here he is, said my father. I turned round with a start. The 2 firemen, having completed their inspection, were crossing the room to the door. My father pointed to a smaller of the men, who had straps of gold braid, and said, "Shake hands with Corporal Robino." The corporal stopped, smiled, and offered me his hand. I shook it. He made a salute and withdrew. "Do not forget it," said my father, "for out of the thousands of hands which you will shake in the course of your life, there will probably not be 10 which possess the worth of his." End of section 18. Recording by Kristin Lewis, Houston, Texas. Section 19 of Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kristin Lewis, Houston, Texas. Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal, by Edmondo de AMICIS. Translated by Isabel, Florence, HAPGOOD. May. From the Apennines to the Andes. The Monthly Story. Many years ago, a Genoese lad of 13, the son of a working man, went from Genoa to America all alone to seek his mother. She had gone 2 years before to Buenos Aires, a city the capital of Argentine Republic, to take service in a wealthy family, in order to earn in a short time enough to place her family once more in easy circumstances, they having fallen through various misfortunes into poverty and debt. They are courageous women, not a few, who take this long voyage with this object in view, and who, thanks to the large wages which people in service receive there, return home at the end of a few years with several thousand lire. The poor mother had wept bitterly at parting from her children, the one aged 18, the other 11, but she had set out full of courage and hope. The voyage was pleasant, and she had no sooner arrived at Buenos Aires than she found, through a Genoese shopkeeper, a cousin of her husband, who had been established there for a very long time, a good Argentine family, which gave high wages and treated her well. For a short time she kept up a regular correspondence with her family. As it had been settled between them, her husband addressed his letters to his cousins, who forwarded them to the woman, and the latter handed her replies to him, and he dispatched them to Genoa, adding a few lines of his own. As she was earning 80 lire a month and spending nothing for herself, she sent home a handsome sum every 3 months, with which her husband, who was a man of honor, gradually paid off their most urgent debts, and thus regained his good reputation. In the meantime he worked away, and was satisfied with the state of his affairs, since he also cherished the hope that his wife would shortly return, for the house seemed empty without her, and the younger son in particular, who was extremely attached to his mother, was very much depressed, and could not be reconciled to having her so far away. But a year had elapsed since they had parted. After a brief letter, in which she said that her health was not very good, they heard nothing more. They wrote twice to the cousin did not reply. They wrote to the Argentine family, where the woman was at service, but it is possible that the letter never reached them, for they had misspelled the name in addressing it. They received no answer. Fearing some misfortune, they wrote to the Italian consulate at Buenos Aires to have inquiries made, and after a lapse of 3 months they received a response from the consul to the effect that, in spite of the advertisements in the newspapers, no one had presented herself or sent any word, and it could not have happened otherwise for this reason, if for no other, that with the idea of sparing the good name of her family, which she fancied she was discrediting by becoming a servant, the good woman had not given her real name to the Argentine family. Several months more passed by with no news. The father and sons were in consternation. The youngest was oppressed by a melancholy which he could not conquer. What was to be done? To whom should they have recourse? The father's first thought had been to set out, to go to America in search of his wife. But his work? Who would support his sons? And neither could the eldest son go, for he had just then begun to earn something, and he was necessary to the family. In this anxiety they lived, repeating each day the same sad speeches, or gazing at each other in silence, when one evening Marco, the youngest, declared with decision, "I am going to America to look for my mother." His father shook his head sorrowfully and made no reply. It was an affectionate thought, but an impossible thing. To make a journey to America, which required a month alone, at the age of 13? But the boy patiently insisted. He persisted that day, the day after, every day with great calmness, reasoning with the good sense of a man. "Others have gone there," he said, "and smaller boys than I, too. Once on board the ship, I shall get there like anyone else. Once arrived there, I will only have to hunt up my cousin's shop. There are plenty of Italians there who will show me the street. After finding our cousin, my mother is found, and if I do not find him, I shall go to the consul. I shall search out that Argentine family. Whatever happens, there is work for all there. I shall find work also, sufficient at least, to earn enough to get home." And thus, little by little, he almost succeeded in persuading his father. His father esteemed him. He knew that he had good judgment and courage, that he was inured to privations and sacrifices, and that all these good qualities had acquired double force in his heart in consequence of the sacred project of finding his mother, whom he adored. In addition to this, the captain of a steamer, the friend of an acquaintance of his, having heard the plan mentioned, undertook to procure a free third-class passage for the Argentine Republic. Finally, after a little hesitation, the father gave his consent. The voyage was decided on. They filled a sack with clothes for him, put a few crowns in his pocket, and gave him the address of the cousin, and one fine evening in April they saw him on board. "Marco, my son," his father said to him, as he gave him his last kiss, with tears in his eyes, on the plank of the steamer, which was on the point of starting, "take courage. You have set out on a holy undertaking, and God will aid you." Poor Marco! His heart was strong and prepared for the hardest trials of this voyage, but when he beheld his beautiful Genoa disappear on the horizon, and found himself on the open sea, on that huge steamer thronged with emigrating peasants, alone, unacquainted with anyone, with that little bag which held his entire fortune, a sudden discouragement assailed him. For 2 days he remained crouching like a dog on the bows, hardly eating, and oppressed with a great desire to weep. Every kind of sad thought passed through his mind, and the saddest, the most terrible, was the one which was the most persistent in its return, the thought that his mother was dead. In his broken and painful slumbers he constantly beheld a strange face, which surveyed him with an air of compassion, and whispered in his ear, "Your mother is dead." And then he awoke, stifling a shriek. Nevertheless, after passing the Straits of Gibraltar, at the first sight of the Atlantic Ocean, he recovered his spirits a little, and his hope, but it was only a brief respite. That vast but always smooth sea, the increasing heat, the misery of all those poor people who surrounded him, the consciousness of his own loneliness, overwhelmed him once more. The empty and monotonous days which succeeded each other became confounded in his memory, as is the case with sick people. It seemed to him that he had been at sea a year, and every morning, on waking, he felt surprised at finding himself there alone on that vast watery expanse, on his way to America. The beautiful flying fish which fell on deck every now and then, the marvelous sunsets of the tropics, with their enormous clouds coloured like flame and blood, all these nocturnal phosphorescences, which made the ocean seem all on fire like a sea of lava, did not produce on him the effect of real things, but of marvels beheld in a dream. There were days of bad weather, during which he remained constantly in the cabin, where everything was rolling and crashing, in the midst of a terrible chorus of cries and curses, and he thought that his last hour had come. There were other days when the sea was calm and yellowish, of insupportable heat, of infinite tedious, interminable, and wretched hours, during which the enervated passengers, stretched motionless on the planks, seemed all dead, and the voyage was endless, sea and sky, sky and sea, to-day the same as yesterday, to-morrow like to-day, and so on, always, eternally. And for long hours he stood leaning on the bulwarks, gazing at that boundless sea in wonder, thinking vaguely of his mother until his eyes closed and his head was drooping with sleep. And then again he beheld that unknown face which gazed upon him with an air of sympathy, and repeated in his ear, "Your mother is dead." And at the sound of that voice he awoke with a start, to resume his dreaming with wide open eyes, and to gaze at the unchanging horizon. The voyage lasted 27 days, but the last days were the best. The weather was fine, and the air was cool. He had made the acquaintance of a good old man, a Lombard, who was going to America to find his son, an agriculturist in the vicinity of the town of Rosario. He had told him his whole story, and the old man kept repeating every little while, as he tapped him on the nape of the neck with his hand, "Courage, my lad, you will find your mother well and happy." This companionship comforted him. His sad presentiments were turned into joyous ones. Seated on the bow beside the aged peasant who was smoking his pipe, beneath the beautiful starry heavens, in the midst of a group of singing peasants, he imagined to himself in his own mind 100 times his arrival at Buenos Aires. He saw himself in a certain street. He found the shop. He flew to his cousin. "How is my mother? Come, let us go at once. Let us go at once." They hurried on together. They ascended a staircase. A door opened, and here his mute soliloquy came to an end. His imagination was swallowed up in a feeling of an inexpressible tenderness, which made him secretly pull forth a little medal that he wore on his neck, and murmur his prayers as he kissed it. On the 27th day after their departure they arrived. It was a beautiful, rosy May morning, when the steamer cast anchor in the immense river of the Plata, near the shore along which stretches the vast city of Buenos Aires, the capital of the Argentine Republic. This splendid weather seemed to him to be a good omen. He was beside himself with joy and impatience. His mother was only a few miles from him. In a few hours more he would have seen her. He was in America, in the New World, and he had had the daring to come alone. The whole of that extremely long voyage now seemed to him to have passed in an instant. It seemed to him that he had flown hither in a dream, and that he had that moment waked. And he was so happy that he hardly experienced any surprise or distress when he felt in his pockets and found only one of the two little heaps into which he had divided his little treasure. In order to be the more sure of not losing the whole of it, he had been robbed. He had only a few liars left. But what mattered that to him when he was near his mother? With his bag in his hand, he descended, in company with many other Italians, to the tugboat which carried him within a short distance of the shore, clambered down from the tug in a boat which bore the name of Andrea Doria, was landed on the wharf, saluted his old Lombard friend, and directed his course in long strides toward the city. On arriving at the entrance of the first street, he stopped a man who was passing by, and begged him to show him in what direction he should go in order to reach the streets of Los Artes. He chanced to have stopped an Italian working man. The latter surveyed him with curiosity, and inquired if he knew how to read. The lad nodded yes. "Well, then," said the laborer, pointing to the street from which he had just emerged, "keep straight on through there, reading the names of all the streets on the corners. You will end by finding the one you want." The boy thanked him, and turned into the street which opened before him. It was a straight and endless but narrow street, bordered by low white houses, which looked like so many little villas, filled with people, with carriages, with carts, which made deafening noise. Here and there floated enormous banners of various hues, with announcements as to the departure of steamers for strange cities inscribed upon them in large letters. At every little distance along the street, on the right and left, he perceived two other streets which ran straight away as far as he could see, also bordered by low white houses, filled with people and vehicles, and bounded at their extremities by the level lines of the measureless plains of America, like the horizon at sea. The city appeared infinite to him. It seemed to him that he might wander for days or weeks, seeing other streets like these, on one hand and on the other, and that all America must be covered with them. He looked attentively at the names of the streets, strange names which cost him an effort to read. At every fresh street he felt his heart beat at the thought that it might be the one he was in search of. He stared at all the women with the thought that he might meet his mother. He caught sight of one in front of him who made his blood leap. He overtook her. She was a negro, and quickening his pace, he walked on and on. On arriving at one cross street, he read, and stood as though rooted to the sidewalk. It was the street of Los Artes. He turned into it and saw the number 117. His cousin's shop was number 175. He quickened his pace still more and almost ran. At number 171 he had to pause to regain his breath, and he said to himself, "Oh, my mother, is it really true that I shall see you in another moment?" He ran on. He arrived at a little haberdasher's shop. This was it. He stepped up close to it. He saw a woman with gray hair and spectacles. "What do you want, boy?" she asked him in Spanish. "Is not this," said the boy, making an effort to utter a sound, "the shop of Francisco Morelli?" "Francisco Morelli is dead," replied the woman in Italian. The boy felt as though he had received a blow on his breast. "When did he die?" "Quite a while ago," replied the woman. "Months ago. His affairs were in a bad state, and he ran away. They say he went to Bahia Blanca, very far from here, and he died just after he reached there. The shop is mine." The boy turned pale. Then he said quickly, "Morelli knew my mother who was at service with Signor Mequinez. He alone could tell me where she is. I have come to America to find my mother." Morelli sent her our letters. I must find my mother." "Poor boy," said the woman. "I don't know. I can ask the boy in the courtyard. He knew the young man who did Morelli's errands. He may be able to tell us something." She went to the end of the shop and called the lad, who came at once. "Tell me," asked the shopwoman, "do you remember whether Morelli's young man went occasionally to carry letters to a woman in service in the house of a countryman?" "To Signor Mequinez," replied the lad. "Yes, signor, sometimes he did, at the end of the street of Los Artes." "Ah, thanks, signor," cried Marco. "Tell me the number. Don't you know it? Send some one with me. Come with me without delay. I have a few soldi left." He said this with as much warmth that, without waiting for the woman to request him, the boy replied, "Come," and at once set out at a rapid pace. They went almost at a run, without saying a word, to the end of the extremely long street, made their way into the entrance of a little white house, and halted in front of a handsome iron gate, through which they could see a small yard filled with a vase of flowers. Marco gave a tug at the bell. A young woman made her appearance. "The Quintus family live here, do they not?" asked the lad anxiously. "They did live here," replied the young woman, pronouncing her Italian and Spanish fashion. "Now we, the Zeballos, live here." "And where have the Sequinez family gone?" asked Marco, his heart throbbing. "They have gone to Cordoba." "Cordoba!" exclaimed Marco. "Where is Cordoba? And the person whom they had in their service?" "The woman, my mother. Their servant was my mother. Had they taken my mother away too?" The young lady looked at him and said, "I do not know. Perhaps my father may know, for he knew them when they went away. Wait a moment." She ran away and soon returned with her father, a tall gentleman with a gray beard. He looked intently for a minute at this appealing type of a little Genoese sailor, with his golden hair and his aquiline nose, and asked him in broken Italian, "Is your mother a Genoese?" Marco replied that she was. "Well, then, the Genoese maid went with them, that I know for certain." "And where have they gone? To Cordova, a city?" The boy gave vent to a sigh, then he said resolutely, "Then I will go to Cordova." "Ah, poor child!" exclaimed the gentleman in Spanish. "Poor boy! Cordova is hundreds of miles from here." Marco turned as white as a corpse, and clung with one hand to the railing. "Let us see, let us see," said the gentleman, moved to pity, and opening the door. "Come inside a moment. Let us see if anything can be done." He sat down, gave the boy a seat, and made him tell his story, listening to it very attentively, meditated a little, then said resolutely, "You have no money, have you?" "I still have a little," answered Marco. The gentleman reflected for 5 minutes more, then seated himself at a desk, wrote a letter, sealed it, and handing it to the boy, he said to him, "Listen to me, little Italian. Take this letter to Boca. That is a little city which is half Genoese, and lies 2 hours' journey from here. Anyone will be able to show you to the road. Go there and find the gentleman to whom this letter is addressed, and whom everyone knows. Carry the letter to him. He will send you off to the town of Rosario to morrow, and will recommend you to someone there, who will think out a way of enabling you to pursue your duty to Cordova, where you will find the Mequinez family and your mother. In the meanwhile, take this," and he placed in his hand a few lire. "Go and keep up your courage. You will find fellow countrymen of yours in every direction, and you will not be forsaken. Farewell." The boy said, "Thank you," without finding any other words, went out with his bag, and having taken leave of his little guide, he set out slowly and sadly in the direction of Boca, filled with amazement at the great and noisy town. Everything that had happened to him from that moment until the evening of that day afterwards lingered in his memory in a confused and uncertain form, like the wild vagaries of a person in a fever, so weary was he, so troubled, so despondent, and at nightfall on the following day, after having slept overnight in a poor little chamber in a house in Boca, beside a harbour porter, After having passed nearly the whole of that day seated on a pile of beams, and as in delirium, in sight of thousands of ships and boats and tugs, he found himself on the poop of a large sailing vessel, loaded with fruit, which was setting out for the town of Rosario, and was managed by 3 robust Genoese, who were bronzed by the sun, and their voices in the dialect which they spoke put a little comfort into his heart once more. The voyage lasted 3 days and 4 nights, and it was a continual amazement to the little traveller. 3 days and 4 nights on that wonderful river Parana, in comparison with which our great Po is but a rivulet, and the length of Italy quadrupled does not equal that of its course. The barge advanced slowly against this immeasurable mass of water. It threaded its way among long islands, once the haunts of serpents and tigers, covered with orange trees and willows, like a floating coppice. Now they passed through narrow canals, from which it seemed as though they could never issue forth. Now they sailed out on vast expanses of water, having the aspect of great tranquil lakes, then among islands again, through the intricate channels of an archipelago, amid enormous masses of vegetation. A profound silence reigned. For large stretches, the shores and vast solitary waters produced the impression of an unknown stream, upon which this poor little sail was the first in all the world to venture itself. The further they advanced, the more this monstrous river dismayed him. He imagined that his mother was at its source, and that this navigation must last for years. Twice a day he ate a little bread and salted meat with the boatmen, who, perceiving that he was sad, never addressed a word to him. At night he slept on deck, and woke every little while with a start, astounded by the limpid light of the moon, which silvered the immense expanse of water and the distant shores, and then his heart sank within him. Cordoba, he repeated that name, Cordoba, like the name of one of those mysterious cities of which he had heard in fables. But then he thought, my mother passed this spot, she saw these islands, these shores, and then these places among which the glance of his mother had fallen no longer seemed strange and solitary to him. At night one of the boatmen sang. That voice reminded him of his mother's songs, when she had lulled him to sleep as a little child. On the last night, when he heard that song, he sobbed. The boatman interrupted his song. Then he cried, "Courage, courage, my son! What the deuce! A Genoese crying because he is far from home! The Genoese go around the world gallantly and triumphantly." And at these words he shook himself. He heard the voice of Genoese blood, and he raised his head aloft with pride, dashing his fist down on the rudder. "Yes," he said to himself, "and if I am also obliged to travel for years and years to come over the world, and to traverse hundreds of miles on foot, I will go on until I find my mother, were I to arrive in a dying condition, and fall dead at her feet. If only I can see her once again! Courage!" And in this frame of mind he arrived at daybreak, on a cool, rosy morning, in front of the city of Rosario, situated on the high banks of the Parana, where the flags and yards of the 100 vessels of every land were mirrored in the waves. Shortly after landing, he went to the town, bag in hand, to seek the Argentina gentleman for whom his protector in Boca had entrusted him with a visiting card, with a few words of recommendation. On nearing Rosario, it seemed to him that he was coming into a city with which he was already familiar. There were the straight, endless streets, bordered with low, white houses, traversed in all directions above the roofs by great bundles of telegraph and telephone wires, which looked like enormous spider webs, and a great confusion of people, of horses, and of vehicles. His head grew confused. He almost thought that he had got back to Buenos Aires, and must hunt up his cousin once more. He wandered about for nearly an hour, making one turn after another, and seeming always to come back to the same street, and after much inquiring he found the house of his new protector. He pulled the bell. There came to the door a big, light-haired, gruff man, who had the air of a steward, and who demanded awkwardly, with a foreign accent, "What do you want?" The boy mentioned the name of his patron. "The master has gone away," replied the steward. "He set out yesterday afternoon for Buenos Aires with his whole family." The boy was speechless a moment. Then he stammered, "But I have no one here. I am alone." And he offered the card. The steward took it, read it, and said surlily, "I don't know what to do for you. I'll give it to him when he returns, a month hence." "But I am alone. I am in need," exclaimed the lad in a supplicating voice. "Come now," said the other, "just as though there were not a plenty of your sort from your country in Rosario. Be off and do your begging in Italy." And he slammed the door in his face. The boy stood there as though he had been turned to stone. Then he picked up his bag again slowly and went out, his heart torn with anguish, his mind in a whirl, assailed all at once by 1,000 anxious thoughts. What was to be done? Where was he to go? From Rosario to Cordova was a day's journey by rail. He had only a few lire left. After subtracting what he should be obliged to spend that day, he would have next to nothing left. Where was he to find the money to pay his fare? He could work, but how? To whom should he apply for work? Ask alms, No. To be repulsed, insulted, humiliated, as he had been a little while ago? No, never, never more. Rather would he die. And at this idea, and at the sight of a very long street which was lost in the distance, he felt his courage desert him once more, flung his bag on the sidewalk, sat down with his back against the wall, and bent his head between his hands in an attitude of despair. People jostled him with their feet as they passed. The vehicles filled the road with noise. Several boys stopped to look at him. He remained thus for a while. Then he was startled by a voice saying to him in a mixture of Italian and Lombard dialect, "What is the matter, little boy?" He raised his face at these words, and instantly sprang to his feet, uttering an exclamation of wonder. "You here?" It was the old Lombard peasant with whom he had struck up a friendship during the voyage. The amazement of the peasant was no less than his own, but the boy did not leave him time to question him. He rapidly told his story, concluding, "Now I am without a soldo. I must go to work. Find me work that I may get together a few lire. I will do anything. I will carry rubbish. I will sweep the streets. I can run on errands, or even work in the country. I am content to live on black bread, but only let it be so that I may set out quickly, that I may find my mother once more. To me this charity, and find me work for the love of God, for I can do no more." "The deuce you say!" said the peasant, looking about him and scratching his chin. "What a story is this? To work, that is soon said. Let us look about a little. Is there no way of finding 30 lire among so many fellow countrymen?" The boy looked at him, consoled by a ray of hope. "Come with me," said the peasant. "Where?" asked the lad, gathering up his bag again. "Come with me." The peasant started on. Marco followed him. They traversed a long stretch of street together without speaking. The peasant halted at the door of an inn which had for its sign a star, and an inscription beneath, "The Star of Italy." He thrust his face in, and turned to the boy. He said cheerily, "We have arrived just at the right moment." They entered a large room where there were numerous tables, and many men seated, drinking and talking loudly. The old Lombard approached the first table, and from the manner in which he saluted the 6 guests who were gathered around it, it was evident that he had been in their company until a very short time previously. They were red in the face, and were clinking their glasses, and vociferating and laughing. "Comrades," said the Lombard, without any preface, remaining on his feet and presenting Marco, "here is a poor lad, our fellow countryman, who has come alone from Genoa to Buenos Aires to seek his mother. At Buenos Aires they told him she is not here, she is in Cordova. He came in a bark to Rosario 3 days and 3 nights on the way, with a couple of lines of recommendation. He presents the card. They made an ugly face at him. He hasn't a centesimo to bless himself with. He is here alone and in despair. He is a lad full of heart. Let us see a bit. Can't we find enough to pay for his ticket to go to Cordova in search of his mother? Are we to leave him here like a dog?" "Never in the world, my heavens! That shall never be said!" they all shouted at once, hammering on the table with their fists. "A fellow countryman of ours! Come hither, little fellow. We are emigrants. See what a handsome young rogue! Out with your coppers, comrades! Bravo! Come along! He has pluck! Drink a sup, compatriot! We'll send you to your mother, never fear!" And one pinched his cheek, another slapped him on the shoulder, a third relieved him of his bag. Other emigrants rose from the neighboring tables and gathered about. The boor's story made the round of the inn. 3 Argentina guests hurried in from an adjoining room, and in less than 10 minutes the Lombard peasant, who was passing around the hat, had collected 42 lire. "Do you see," he said then, turning to the boy, "how fast things are done in America?" "Drink," cried another to him, offering him a glass of wine, "to the health of your mother." All raised their glasses, and Marco repeated, "To the health of my—" But a sob of joy choked him, and settling the glass on the table, he flung himself on the old man's neck. At daybreak on the following morning he set out for Cordova, ardent and happy, filled with thoughts of happiness; but there is no cheerfulness that rules for long in the face of certain sinister aspects of nature. The weather was close and dull. The train, which was nearly empty, ran through an immense plain, destitute of every sign of habitation. He found himself alone in a very long car, which resembled those on trains for the wounded. He gazed to the right, he gazed to the left, and he saw nothing but an endless waste, strewn with tiny deformed trees, with contorted trunks and branches, in altitudes such as were never seen before, almost of wrath and anguish, and a sparse and melancholy vegetation which gave to the plain the aspect of a ruined cemetery. He dozed for half an hour, then resumed his survey. The spectacle was still the same. The railroad stations were deserted like the dwellings of hermits. When the train stopped, not a sound was heard. It seemed to him that he was alone in a lost train, abandoned in the middle of the desert. It seemed to him as though each station must be the last, and that he should then enter the mysterious regions of the savages. An icy breeze nipped his face. On embarking at Genoa toward the end of April, it had not occurred to him that he should find winter in America, and he was dressed for the summer. After several hours of this, he began to suffer from cold, and in connection with the cold, from the fatigue of the days he had recently passed through, filled as they had been with violent emotions, and from sleepless and harassing nights, he fell asleep, slept a long time, and awoke benumbed. He felt ill. Then a vague terror of falling ill, of dying on the journey, seized upon him, a fear of being thrown out there in the middle of that desolate prairie, where his body would be torn in pieces by dogs and birds of prey, like the corpse of horses and cows, which he had caught sight of every now and then beside the track, and from which he had turned aside his eyes in disgust. In this state of anxious illness, in the midst of the dark silence of nature, his imagination grew excited, and he looked on the dark side of things. Was he quite sure, after all, that he should find his mother at Cordova? And what if she had not gone there? What if that gentleman in the Via de los Autos had made a mistake? And what if she were dead? Thus meditating, he fell asleep again, and dreamed that he was in Cordova, and it was night, and that he heard cries from all the doors and all the windows. "She is not here! She is not here! She is not here!" This aroused him with a start and terror, and he saw at the other end of the car 3 bearded men, enveloped in shawls of various colors, who were staring at him and talking together in a low tone, and the suspicion flashed across him that they were assassins, and that they wanted to kill him for the sake of stealing his bag. Fear was added to his consciousness of illness, and to the cold. His fancy, already upset, became unbalanced and distorted. The 3 men kept on staring at him. One of them moved towards him. Then his reason wandered, and rushed towards him with arms wide open. He shrieked: "I have nothing. I am a poor boy. I have come from Italy. I am in search of my mother. I am alone. Do not do me any harm." They instantly understood the situation. They took pity on him, petted and soothed him, speaking to him in many words which he did not hear nor comprehend. And seeing that his teeth were chattering with cold, they wrapped one of their shawls around him, and made him sit down again, so that he might go to sleep. And he did fall asleep once more, as night was falling. When they aroused him, he was in Cordova. End of Section 19. Recording by Kristin Lewis, Houston, Texas. Section 20 of Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kristin Lewis, Houston, Texas. Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal by Edmondo de Amicis. Translated by Isabel, Florence, HAPGOOD. May. Section 20. Ah, what a deep breath he drew, and with what impetuosity he flew from the car. He inquired of one of the station employees where the house of the engineer Mequinez was situated. The latter mentioned the name of a church. It stood beside the church. The boy hastened away. It was night. He entered the city, and it seemed to him that he was entering Rosario once more, that he once again beheld those straight streets flanked with little white houses, and intercepted by other very long and straight streets. But there were very few people, and under the light of the rare street lanterns he encountered strange faces of a hue unknown to him, between black and greenish, and raising his head from time to time, he saw churches of bizarre architecture outlined black and vast against the sky. The city was dark and silent, but after having traversed that immense desert, it appeared lively to him. He inquired his way of a priest, speedily found the church and the house, pulled the bell with one trembling hand, and pressed the other on his breast to repress the beating of his heart, which was leaping to his throat. An old woman with a light in her hand opened the door. The boy could not speak at once. "Whom do you want?" demanded the dame in Spanish. "The engineer Mequinez," replied Marco. The old woman made a motion to cross her arms on her breast, and replied with a shake of her head, "So you too have dealings with the engineer Mequinez. It strikes me that it's time to stop this. We have been worried for the last 3 months. It is not enough that the newspapers have said it. We shall have to have it printed on the corner of the street that Signor Mequinez has gone to live at Tucuman." The boy made a gesture of despair, and then he gave way to an outburst of passion. "So there is a curse upon me! I am doomed to die on the road without having found my mother. I shall go mad. I shall kill myself. Heavens, what is the name of that country? Where is it? At what distance is it situated?" "Ah, poor boy," replied the old woman, touched with pity. "A mere trifle. We are 400 or 500 miles from there at least." The boy covered his face with his hands, and then he asked with a sob, "And now what am I to do?" "What am I to say to you, my poor child?" responded the dame. "I don't know." But suddenly an idea struck her, and she added hastily, "Listen, now that I think of it, there is one thing that you can do. Go down this street to the right, and at the third house you will find a courtyard. There you will find a capataz, a trader, who is setting out tomorrow for Tucuman, with his wagons and his oxen. Go and see if he will take you, and offer him your services. Perhaps he will give you a place on his wagons. Go at once." The boy grasped his bag, thanked her as he ran, and 2 minutes later found himself in a vast courtyard, lighted by lanterns, where a number of men were engaged in loading sacks of grain on certain enormous carts, which resembled the movable houses of mountebanks, with rounded tops and very tall wheels. A tall man with moustaches, enveloped in a sort of mantle of black and white check, and with big boots, was directing the work. The lad approached this man, and timidly proffered his request, saying that he had come from Italy, and that he was in search of his mother. The capataz, which signifies the head conductor of this convoy of wagons, surveyed him from head to foot with a keen glance, and replied dryly, "I have no place." "I have 15 lire," answered the boy in a supplicating tone. "I will give you my 15 lire. I will work on the journey. I will fetch the water and fodder for the animals. I will do anything. A little bread will suffice for me. Make a place for me, signor." The capataz looked at him over again, and replied with a better grace, "There is no room. Besides, we are not going to Tucuman. We are going to another town, Santiago del Estero. We should have to leave you at a certain point, and you would still have a long way to go on foot." "Ah, I would make twice as long a journey," exclaimed Marco. "I can walk. Do not worry about that. I shall get there by some means or another. Make a little room for me, Signor. Out of charity, for pity's sake, do not leave me here alone. Beware, it is a journey of 20 days. It matters nothing to me. It is a hard journey. I will endure anything. You will have to travel alone. I fear nothing if I can only find my mother. Have compassion. The capataz drew his face close to a lantern and scrutinized him. Then he said, "Very well." The lad kissed his hand. "You shall sleep in one of the wagons tonight," added the capataz as he quitted him. "Tomorrow morning at 4 o'clock I will wake you. Good night." At 4 o'clock in the morning, by the light of the stars, the long string of wagons was set in motion with a great noise. Each cart was drawn by 6 oxen, and all were followed by a great number of spare animals for a change. The boy, who had been awakened and placed in one of the carts, on the sacks, instantly fell asleep again in a deep sleep. When he awoke, the convoy had halted in a solitary spot, full in the sun, and all the men, the peons, were seated around a quarter of calf, which was roasted in the open air beside a large fire that flickered in the wind. They all ate together, took a nap, and then set out again, and thus the journey continued, regulated like a march of soldiers. Every morning they set out at the road at 5 o'clock, halted at 9, set out again at 5 o'clock in the evening, and halted again at 10. The peones rode on horseback and prodded the oxen with long goads. The boy lighted the fire for the roasting, gave the beasts their fodder, polished up the lanterns, and brought water for drinking. The landscape passed before him like an indistinct vision, vast groves of little brown trees, villages consisting of a few scattered houses, with red and battle-mended facades, very vast tracts, possibly the ancient beds of the great salt lakes, which gleamed white with salt as far as the eye could reach, and on every hand, and always the prairie, solitude, silence. On very rare occasions they met 2 or 3 travelers on horseback, followed by a herd of picked horses, who passed them at a gallop like a whirlwind. The days were all alike, as at sea, lengthy and wearisome, but the weather was fine. But the peones became more and more exacting every day, as though the lad were their bond slave. Some of them treated him brutally, and threatened him. All forced him to serve them without mercy. They made him carry great bundles of forage. They sent him to get water at long distances, and he, broken with fatigue, could not even sleep at night, continually tossed about as he was by the violent jolts of the wagon, and the deafening groaning of the wheels and wooden axles. In addition to this, the wind having risen, a fine, reddish, greasy dust, which enveloped everything, penetrated the wagon, made its way under the covers, filled his eyes and mouth, robbed him of sight and breath, constantly, oppressively, insupportably. Worn out with toil and lack of sleep, reduced to rags and dirt, reproached and ill-treated from morning until night, the poor boy grew every day more dejected, and would have lost heart entirely if the capataz had not addressed a kind word to him now and then. He often wept unseen in a corner of the wagon, with his face against his bag, which no longer contained anything but rags. Every morning he rose weaker and more discouraged, and as he looked over the country and beheld always the same boundless and implacable plain like a terrestrial ocean, he said to himself, "Ah, I shall not hold out until tonight. I shall not hold out until tonight. Today I shall die on the road." And his toil increased, his ill-treatment was redoubled. One morning, in the absence of the capataz, one of the men struck him, because he had delayed in fetching the water, and then they all began to take turns at it, when they gave him an order, dealing him a kick, saying, "Take that, you vagabond, carry that to your mother." His heart was breaking, he felt ill. For 3 days he remained in the wagon with the coverlet over him, fighting a fever, and seeing no one except the capataz, who came to give him his drink and feel his pulse. And then he believed that he was lost, and invoked his mother in despair, calling her 100 times by name. "Oh, my mother, help me! Come to me, for I am dying. Oh, my mother, I shall never see you again. My poor mother, who will find me dead beside the way." And he folded his hands over his bosom and prayed. Then he grew better, thanks to the care of the capataz, and recovered. But with his recovery arrived the most terrible day of his journey, the day on which he was to be left to his own devices. They had been on the way for more than 2 weeks. When they arrived at the point where the road to Tucuman parted from that which leads to Santiago delle Estero, the capataz told him that they must separate. He gave him some instructions with regard to the road, tied his bag on his shoulder in a manner which would not annoy him as he walked, and breaking off short, as though he feared that he should be affected, he bade him farewell. The boy had barely time to kiss him on one arm. The other men, too, who had treated him so harshly, seemed to feel a little pity at the sight of him left thus alone, and they made signs of farewell to him as they moved away, and he returned the salute with his hand, stood watching the convoy until it was lost to sight in the red dust of the plain, and then set out sadly on his road. One thing, on the other hand, comforted him with a little from the first. After all these days of travel across the endless plain, which was forever the same, he saw before him a chain of mountains very high and blue, with white summits which reminded him of the Alps, and gave him the feeling of having drawn near to his own country once more. They were the Andes, the dorsal spine of the American continent, that immense chain which extends from Terra del Fuego to the glacial sea of the Arctic Pole, through 110 degrees of latitude, and he was also comforted by the fact that the air seemed to him to grow constantly warmer. This happened because in ascending toward the north he was slowly approaching the tropics. At great distances apart there were tiny groups of houses, with a petty shop where he bought something to eat. He met men on horseback. Every now and then he saw women and children seated on the ground, motionless and grave, with faces entirely new to him, of an earthen hue, with oblique eyes and prominent cheekbones, who looked at him fixedly, following him with their gaze, and turning their heads slowly like automatons. They were Indians. The first day he walked as long as his strength would permit, and slept under a tree. On the second day he made considerably less progress, and with less spirit. His shoes were tattered, his feet wounded, his stomach weakened by bad food. Toward evenings he began to be alarmed. He had heard in Italy that in this land there were serpents. He fancied that he heard them crawling. He halted, then set out on a run, and with cold chills in all his bones. At times he was seized with a profound pity for himself, and he wept silently as he walked. Then he thought, "Oh, how much my mother would suffer if she knew that I am afraid!" And this thought restored his courage. Then, in order to distract his thoughts from fear, he thought of her. He recalled to mind her words when she set out from Genoa, and the movement with which she had arranged the coverlet beneath his chin when he was in bed, and when he was a baby. For every time that she took him in her arms, she said to him, "Stay here a little while with me." And thus she remained for a long time, with her head resting on his, thinking, and he said to himself, "Shall I see you again, dear mother? Shall I arrive at the end of my journey, my mother?" And he walked on and on among the strange trees, vast plantations of sugar cane, and fields without end, always with those blue mountains in front of him, which cut the sky with their exceedingly lofty crest. 4 days, 5 days, a week passed. His strength was rapidly declining, his feet were bleeding. Finally, one evening at sunset, they said to him, "Tucuman is 50 miles from here." He uttered a cry of joy, and hastened his step, as though he had in that moment regained all his lost vigor. But it was a brief illusion. His forces suddenly abandoned him, and he fell upon the brink of a ditch, exhausted. But his heart was beating with content. The heaven, thickly sown with the most brilliant stars, had never seemed so beautiful to him. He contemplated it as he lay stretched out on the grass to sleep, and thought that perhaps at that very moment his mother was gazing at him. And he said, "Oh, my mother, where are you? What are you doing at this moment? Do you think of your son? Do you think of your Marco, who is so near you?" Poor Marco! He could have seen in what a case his mother was at that moment. He would have made a superhuman effort to proceed on his way, and to reach her a few hours earlier. She was ill in bed in a ground-floor room of a lordly mansion, where dwelt the entire Menequez family. The latter had become very fond of her, and had helped her a great deal. The poor woman had already been ailing when the engineer Mequinez had been obliged unexpectedly to set out from Buenos Aires, and she had not benefited at all by the fine air of Cordova. But then the fact that she had received no response to her letters from her husband, nor from her cousin, the presentiment, always lively, of some great misfortune, the continual anxiety in which she had lived between the parting and staying, expecting every day some bad news, had caused her to grow worse rapidly. Finally, a very serious malady had declared itself, a strangulated internal rupture. She had not risen from her bed for a fortnight. A surgical operation was necessary to save her life, and at precisely the moment when Marco was apostrophizing her, the master and mistress of the house were standing beside her bed, arguing with her with great gentleness to persuade her to allow herself to be operated on, and she was persisting in her refusal and weeping. A good physician of Tucuman had come in vain a week before. "No, my dear master," she said, "do not count upon it. I have not the strength to resist. I should die under the surgeon's knife. It is better to allow me to die thus. I no longer cling to life. All is at an end for me. It is better to die before learning what has happened to my family." And her master and mistress opposed her, and said that she must take courage, that she would receive a reply to the last letters, which had been sent directly to Genova, that she must allow the operation to be performed, and that it must be done for the sake of her family. But this suggestion of her children only aggravated her profound discouragement, which had for a long time prostrated her with increasing anguish. At these words she burst into tears. "Oh, my sons, she exclaimed, wringing her hands. "Perhaps they are no longer alive. It is better that I should die also. I thank you, my good master and mistress. I thank you from my heart, but it is better that I should die. At all events, I am certain that I should not be cured by this operation. I thank you for all your care, my good master and mistress. It is useless for the doctor to come again after tomorrow. I wish to die. It is my fate to die here. I have decided." Then they began to console her and to repeat, "Don't say that," and to take her hand and beseech her. But she closed her eyes in exhaustion and fell into a doze, so that she appeared to be dead, and her master and mistress remained there a little while by the faint light of a taper, watching with great compassion that admirable mother who, for the sake of saving her family, had come to die 6,000 miles from her country, to die after having toiled so hard. Poor woman! And she was so honest, so good, and so unfortunate. Early on the morning of the following day, Marco, bent and limping with his bag on his back, entered the city of Tucuman, one of the youngest and most flourishing towns of the Argentine Republic. It seemed to him that he again beheld Cordova, Rosario, Buenos Aires, and there were the same straight and extremely long streets, the same low white houses, but on every hand there was a new magnificent vegetation, a perfumed air, a marvellous light, a sky limpid and profound, such as he had never seen before in Italy. As he advanced through the streets, he experienced once more the feverish agitation which had seized on him in Buenos Aires, and he stared at the windows and doors of all the houses. He stared at all the women who passed him with the anxious hope that he might meet his mother. He would have liked to question every one, but he did not dare to stop any one. All the people who were standing at the doors turned to gaze after the poor, tattered, dusty lad, who showed that he had come from afar. And he was seeking among these people a countenance which would inspire him with confidence, in order to direct to its owner that tremendous query, when his eyes fell upon the sign of an inn, upon which was inscribed an Italian name. Inside were a man with spectacles and 2 women. He approached the door slowly, and summoning up a resolute spirit, he inquired, "Can you tell me, signor, where the family Mequinez lives?" "The engineer Mequinez?" asked the innkeeper in his turn. "The engineer Mequinez," replied the lad in a faint voice. "The Mequinez family is not in Tucuman," replied the innkeeper. A cry of desperation pain, like of one has been stabbed, formed an echo to these words. The innkeeper and the woman rose, and some neighbors ran up. "What's the matter? What ails you, my boy?" said the innkeeper, drawing him into the shop and making him sit down. "There's no reason for despairing. The Mequinez family is not here, but a little distance off, a few hours from Tucuman." Where?" shrieked Marco, springing up like one restored to life. 15 miles from here," continued the man, "on the river at Saladillo. in a place where a big sugar factory is being built, and a cluster of houses. Signor Mequinez's house is there. Everyone knows it. You can reach it in a few hours." "I was there a month ago," cried the youth who had hastened up at the cry. Marco stared at him with wide-opened eyes, and asked him hastily, turning pale as he did so, "Did you see the servant of Signor Mequinez, the Italian?" "The Genoese? Yes, I saw her." Marco burst into a convulsive sob, which was half a laugh and half a sob. Then, with an impulse of violent resolution, "Which way am I to go? Quick, the road! Shall set out instantly. Show me the way." "But it's a day's march," they all told him in one breath. "You are weary. You should rest." "You can set out tomorrow." "Impossible, impossible," replied the lad. "Tell me the way. I shall not wait another moment. I shall set out for once, were I to die on the road." On perceiving him so inflexible, they no longer opposed him. "May God accompany you," they said to him. "Look out for the path through the forest. A fair journey to you, little Italian." A man went with him outside of the town, pointed out to him the road, gave him some counsel, and stood still to watch him start. At the end of a few minutes the boy disappeared, limping with his bag on his shoulders, behind the thicket trees which lined the road. That night was a dreadful one with the poor sick woman. She suffered cruel pain, which wrung from her shrieks that were enough to burst her veins and render her delirious at times. The woman waited on her. She lost her head. Her mistress ran in from time to time in a fright. All began to fear that, even if she had decided to allow herself to be operated on, the doctor, who was not to come until the next day, would have arrived too late. During the moments when she was not raving, however, it was evident that her most terrible torture arose, not from her bodily pains, but from the thought of her distant family. Emaciated, wasted away with changed visage, she thrust her hands through her hair, and with a gesture of desperation, and shrieked, my God, to die so far away, to die without seeing them again! My poor children, who will be left without a mother? My poor little creatures, my poor darlings, my Marco, who is still so small, only as tall as this, and so good and affectionate. You do not know what a boy he was. If you only knew, signor, I could not tear him from my neck when I set out. He wept in a way to move your pity. He sobbed. It seemed as though he knew that he would never behold his poor mother again. Poor Marco, my poor baby! I thought that my heart would break. Ah, if I had only died then, died while they were bidding me farewell, if I had but dropped dead, without a mother, my poor child, he who loved me so dearly, who needed me so much. Without a mother, in misery, he will be forced to beg. He, Marco, my Marco, will stretch out his hand, starving. Oh, eternal God, no, I will not die. The doctor, call him at once. Let him come. Let him cut me. Let him cleave my breast. Let him drive me mad, but let him save my life. I want to recover. I want to live, to depart, to flee tomorrow at once. The doctor. Help, help. And the woman seized her hands and soothed her and made her calm herself little by little, and spoke to her of God and of hope, and then she fell back again in a mortal agony, wept with her hands clenched in her gray hair, moaned like an infant, uttering a prolonged lament, and murmuring from time to time, "Oh, my Genoa, my house, all that sea! Oh, my Marco, my poor Marco! Where is he now, my poor darling?" And it was midnight, and her poor Marco, having had passed many hours on the brink of a ditch, his strength exhausted, was then walking through a forest of gigantic trees, monsters of vegetation, huge bulls like the pillars of a cathedral, which interlaced their enormous crest, slivered by the moon at a wonderful height. Vaguely amid the half-gloom he caught glimpses of the myriads of trunks of all forms, upright, inclined, twisted, crossed in strange postures of menace and of conflict, some overthrown on the earth like towers which had fallen bodily, and covered with a dense and confused mass of vegetation, which seemed like a furious throng, disputing the ground span by span, others collected in great groups, vertical and serrated, like trophies of the Titanic lances, whose tips touched the clouds, a superior grandeur, a prodigious disorder of colossal forms, the most majestically terrible spectacle which vegetation nature ever presented. At times he was overwhelmed by a great stupor, but his mind instantly took flight again toward his mother. He was worn out, with bleeding feet, alone in the middle of this formidable forest, where it was only at long intervals that he saw tiny human habitations, which at the foot of these trees seemed like ant-hills or some buffalo asleep beside the road. He was exhausted, but he was not conscious of his exhaustion. He was alone, yet he had no fear. The grandeur of the forest rendered his soul grand. His nearness to his mother gave him the strength and the hardihood of a man. The memory of the ocean, of the alarms and the sufferings which he had undergone and vanquished, of the toil which he had endured, of the iron constancy which he had displayed, caused him to uplift his brow. All his strong and noble Genoese blood flowed back to his heart in an ardent tide of joy and audacity, and a new thing took place within him. While he had, up to this time, borne in his mind an image of his mother, dimmed and paled somewhat by the 2 years of absence, at that moment the image grew clear, and he again beheld her face, perfect and distinct as he had not beheld it for a long time. He beheld it close to him, shining, speaking, and he again beheld the most fleeting motions of her eyes and of her lips, all her attitudes, all the shades of her thoughts, and urged by these pursuing recollections, he hastened his step. A new affection and unspeakable tenderness grew in him, grew in his heart, making sweet and quiet tears to flow down his face. As he advanced through the gloom, he spoke to her. He said to her the words which he would murmur in her ear in a little while more. "I am here, my mother. Behold me here. I will never leave you again. We will return home together, and I will remain always beside you on board the ship, close beside you, and no one shall ever part me from you again. No one, never more, so long as I have life." And in the meantime he did not observe how the silvery light of the moon was dying away on the summits of the gigantic trees, in the delicate whiteness of the dawn. At 8 o'clock on that morning the doctor from Tucuman, a young Argentine, was already by the bedside of the sick woman, in company with an assistant, endeavouring for the last time to persuade her to permit herself to be operated on; and the engineer Mequinez and his wife added their warmest persuasions to those of the former, but all was in vain. The woman, feeling her strength exhausted, had no longer any faith in the operation, and she was perfectly certain that she should die under it, or that she should only survive in a few hours, after having suffered in vast pains that were more poignant than those of which she should die in any case. The doctor lingered to tell her once more, "But the operation is a safe one. Your safety is certain, provided you exercise a little courage, and your death is equally certain if you refuse." It was a sheer waste of words. "No," she replied in a faint voice, "I will still have courage to die, but I no longer have any to suffer uselessly. Leave me to die in peace." The doctor was discouraged and said no more. No one pleaded further. Then the woman turned her face toward her mistress, and addressed to her her last prayers in a dying voice. "Dear, good Signor," she said with a great effort, sobbing, "you will send this little money and my poor effects to my family through the consul. I hope that they may all be alive. My heart presages well in these my last moments. You will do me this favour, to write that I have always thought of them, that I have always toiled for them, for my children, that my sole grief was not to have seen them once more, but that I died courageously, with resignation, blessing them, and that I recommend to my husband and to my elder son, the youngest, my poor Marco, that I have bore him in my heart until the last moment." Suddenly she became excited, and shrieked as she grasped her hands, "My Marco, my baby, my life!" And on casting her tearful eyes around her, she perceived that her mistress was no longer there. She had been secretly called away. She sought her master. He had disappeared, and no one remained with her except 2 nurses and the assistant. She heard in the adjoining room the sounds of hurried footsteps, a murmur of hasty and subdued voices, and the repressed exclamations. The sick woman fixed her glazing eyes on the door in expectation. At the end of a few minutes she saw the doctor appear with an unusual expression on his face. Then her mistress and master, with their countenance also altered. All 3 gazed at her with singular expression, and exchanged a few words in a low tone. She fancied that the doctor said to her mistress, "Better let it be at once." She did not understand. "Josepha," said her mistress to the sick woman in a trembling voice, "I have some good news for you. Prepare your heart for good news." The woman observed her narrowly. "News, pursued the woman with increasing agitation, which will give you great joy. The sick woman's eyes dilated. Prepare yourself, continued the mistress, to see a person of whom you are very fond. The woman raised her head with a vigorous movement and began to gaze in rapid succession, first at the lady and then at the door, with flashing eyes. A person, added the lady, turning pale, who has just arrived unexpectedly. Who is it? Shrieked the woman, with a strange and choked voice like that of a person in terror. An instant later she gave vent to a shrill scream, sprang into a sitting position in her bed, and remained motionless with startling eyes, and her hands pressed to her temples, as in the presence of a supernatural apparition. Margot, tattered and dusty, stood there on the threshold, held back by the doctor's hand on one arm. The woman uttered a cry. "Marco, my son!" Marco rushed forward. She stretched out to him her fleshless arms, and straining him to her heart with the strength of a tiger, she burst into a violent laugh, broken by deep, tearless sobs, which caused her to fall back, choking on her pillow. But she speedily recovered herself, and mad with joy, she shrieked as she covered his head with kisses. "How do you come here? Why? Is it you? How you have grown! Who brought you? Are you alone? You are not ill? It is you, Marco. It is not a dream. Speak to me." Then she suddenly changed her tone. "No, be silent. Wait." And turning to the doctor, she said hurriedly, "Quick, doctor, this instant. I want to get well. I'm ready. Do not lose a moment. Take Marco away so that he may not hear. Marco, my love, it is nothing. I will tell you about it. One more kiss. Go. Here I am, doctor." Marco was taken away. The master, mistress, and woman retired in haste. The surgeon and his assistant remained behind and closed the door. Signor Mequinez attempted to lead Marco to a distant room, but it was impossible. He seemed rooted to the pavement. "What is it?" he asked. "What is the matter with my mother? What are they doing to her?" And when Mequinez said softly, still trying to draw him away, "Here, listen to me. I will tell you now. Your mother is ill. She must undergo a little operation. I will explain it all to you. Come with me." "No," replied the lad, resisting. "I want to stay here. Explain it to me here." The engineer heaped words on words as he drew him away. The boy began to grow terrified and to tremble. Suddenly an acute cry, like that of one wounded to the death, rang through the whole house. The boy responded with another desperate shriek. "My mother is dead." The doctor appeared on the threshold and said, "Your mother is saved." The boy gazed at him for a moment, and then flung himself at his feet, sobbing, "I thank you, doctor." But the doctor raised him with a gesture, saying, "Rise. It is you, you heroic child, who have saved your mother." End of section 20. Recording by Kristin Lewis, Houston, Texas. Section 21 of Heart, A Schoolboy's Journal. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kristin Lewis, Houston, Texas. Heart, A Schoolboy's Journal, by Edmondo de AMICIS. Translated by Isabel, Florence, HAPGOOD. May. Part 4. Summer, Wednesday, 24th. Margot, the Genoese, is the last little hero, but one whose acquaintance we shall make this year. Only one remains for the month of June. There are but 2 more monthly examinations, 26 days of lessons, 6 Thursdays, and 5 Sundays. The air of the end of the year is already felt. The trees of the garden, leafy and in blossom, cast a fine shade on the gymnastics of Paris. The scholars are already dressed in summer clothes, and it is beautiful, at the close of school and the exit of classes, to see how different everything is from what it was in the months that are past. The long locks which touch the shoulders have disappeared. All heads are closely shorn, bare legs and throats are to be seen. There are little straw hats of every shape, with ribbons that fall over the backs of the wearers. Shirts and neckties are of every hue. All the little children wear something red or blue about them, a facing, a border, a tassel, a scrap of some vivid color, tacked on somewhere by the mother, so that even the poorest may make a good figure, and many come to school without any hats, as though they had run away from home. Some wear the white gymnasium suit. There is one of the schoolmistresses, Ducati boys, who is red from head to foot, like a boiled lobster. Several are dressed like sailors. But the finest of all is a little mason, who has donned a big straw hat, which gives him the appearance of a half candle with a shade over it, and it is ridiculous to see him make his hare's face beneath it. Karate, too, has given up his catskin cap, and wears an old travelling cap of grey silk. Bottini has sort of a Scotch dress, all decorated. Crossi displays his bare breast. Precossi is lost inside of a blue blouse belonging to the blacksmith. And Garoffi, now that he has been obliged to discard the cloak with which he hid his wares, all his pockets are visible, bulging with all sort of huckster's trifles. With the list of his lotteries forced themselves out, now all of his pockets allow their contents to be seen. Fans made of half, a newspaper, knobs of canes, darts to fire at birds, herbs, and maybugs which creep out of his pockets and cross slowly over the jackets. Many of the little fellows carry bunches of flowers to the mistresses. The mistresses are dressed in summer garments awful, of cheerful tints, all except the little nun, who is always in black, and the mistress with the red feathers still has her red feathers, and a knot of red ribbon at her neck, all tumbled with the little hands of her scholars, who always make her laugh and then run. It is a season, too, of cherry trees, of butterflies, of music in the streets, and of rambles in the country. Many of the 4th grade run away to bathe in the Po. All have their hearts already set on vacation. Each day they issue forth from school more gay and impatient than the day before. Only it pains me to see Garrone in mourning, and my poor mistress of the primary, who is thinner and whiter than ever, and who coughs with the ever-increasing violence. She walks all bent over, and greets me so sadly. The Poetic Side, Friday, the 26th. You are now beginning to understand the poetry of school, Enrico, but at present you only survey the school from within. It will seem much more beautiful and more poetic to you 20 years from now, when you go there to escort your own boys, and you will then survey it from the outside, as I do. While waiting for school to close, I'll wander about the silent street near by, and listen at the windows of the ground floor, which are screened by Venetian blinds. At one window I hear the voice of a schoolmistress saying, "Ah, what's a shape for the tea? It won't do, my dear boy. What would your father say to it?" At the next window there resounds the heavy voice of a master saying, "I will buy 50 meters of cloth at 4 lire and half the metre, and sell it again." Further on is the mistress with the red feather, who is reading aloud, "The Piatre Mica, with a delighted train of powder." From the adjoining classrooms come all the chirping of 1,000 birds, which signifies that the master has stepped out for a moment. I proceed onward, and as I turn the corner I hear a scholar weeping, and the voice of a mistress reproving and comforting him. From the lofty windows issue verses, names of great and good men, fragments of sentences which teach virtue, the love of country, and courage. Then ensue moments of silence, in which one would declare that the building is empty, and it does not seem possible that there should be 700 boys within. Noisy outbursts of hilarity are heard again, provoked by the jest of a master in a good humour, and the people who are passing halt and glance with sympathy toward that pleasing school which contains so much youth and so many hopes. Then a sudden dull sound is heard of a clapping to of books and satchels, a shuffling of feet, a buzz which spreads from room to room, and from the lower to the higher, as at the sudden spread of a bit of good news. It is the beadle who is making his rounds, announcing the dismissal of school, and at that sound a throng of women, men, girls, and youth press closer around the door, waiting for their sons, brothers, or grandchildren, while from the doors of the classrooms little boys shoot forth into the big hall as from a spout, seize their little capes and hats, creating a great confusion with them on the floor, and dancing all about, until the beadle chases them forth one after the other. At length they come forth in long files, stamping their feet, and then from all the relatives come a shower of questions. Did you know your lesson? How much work did they give you? What have you to do for tomorrow? When does the monthly examination come? But even the poor mothers who do not know how to read open the copybooks, gaze at the problems, and ask particulars. Only 8? 10 with commendation? 9 for the lesson? And they grow uneasy and rejoice and question the masters and talk of the prospect for the examinations, how beautiful all this is and how great its promise to the world. Your mother. The Death Mute, Sunday, 28th. The month of May could not have had a better ending than my visit this morning. We heard a jingling of the bell and all ran to see what it meant. I heard my father say in a tone of astonishment, "You here, Giorgio?" Giorgio was our gardener in Chieri, who now has his family at Condove, and had just arrived from Genoa, where he has disembarked on the preceding day, on his return from Greece, after working on the railroad there for the last 3 years. He had had a big bundle in his arms. He had grown a little older, but his face is still red and jolly. My father asked him in, but he refused and suddenly inquired, assuming a serious look, "How is my family? How is Gigia?" "She was well a few days ago," replied my mother. Giorgio uttered a deep sigh. "Oh, God be praised! I did not have the courage to present myself at the deaf mute institution until I had heard about her. I will leave my bundle here and run to get her. It is 3 years since I have seen my poor little daughter, 3 years since I have seen any of my people." My father told me to go with him. "Excuse me, one word more," said the gardener from the landing. My father interrupted him. "How are your affairs?" "All right," the other replied. "Thanks to God, I have brought back a few soldi. But I wanted to inquire. Tell me how the education of the little dumb girl is getting on. When I left her she was like a little animal, poor thing. I don't put much faith in these colleges. Has she learned how to make signs? My wife did write to me, to be sure. She is learning to speak. She is making progress. But I said to myself, what is the use of her learning to talk if I don't know how to make signs myself? How shall we manage to understand each other? Poor child! It is well enough for them to understand each other, one unfortunate with another unfortunate. How is she getting on then? How is she?" My father smiled and replied, "I shall not tell you anything about it. You will go see. Go, don't waste another minute." We started. The institute is close by. As we went along at a great pace, the gardener talked to me, and grew sad. "Ah, my poor Gigia, to be born with such an infirmity! To think that I have never heard her call me father, and that she has never heard me call her my daughter! But she has never either heard or spoken a single word since she has been in the world. And it is lucky that a charitable gentleman was found to pay the expenses of the institute. But that is all. She could not enter there until she was 8 years old. She has not been at home for 3 years. She is now going on 11, and she has grown. Tell me she has grown. She is in good spirits?" "You will see in a moment. You will see in a moment," I replied, hastening my pace. "But where is this institution?" he demanded. "My wife went with her after I was gone. It seems to me that it ought to be near here." We had just reached it. We at once entered the parlor. An attendant came to meet us. "I am the father of Gigia Voggi," said the gardener. "Send for my daughter at once." "They are at play," replied the attendant. "I will go and inform the matron," and he hastened away. The gardener could no longer speak nor stand still. He stared at all 4 walls without seeing anything. The door opened. A teacher entered, dressed in black, holding a little girl by the hand. Father and daughter gazed at each other for an instant, and then flew into each other's arms with a cry. The girl was dressed in a white and reddish striped material, with a gray apron. She is a little taller than I. She cried and clung to her father's neck with both arms. Her father disengaged himself and began to look her over from head to foot, panting as though he had run a long way, and he exclaimed, "Ah, how she has grown! How pretty she has become! Oh, my dear, poor Gigia! My poor mute child! Are you her teacher, signora? Tell her to make some of her signs for me, for I shall be able to understand something, and then I will learn little by little. Tell her to make me understand something with her gestures." The teacher smiled and said in a low voice to the girl, "Who is this man who has come to see you?" And the girl replied with a smile, in a coarse, strange, harsh voice, like that of a savage who was speaking for the first time in our language, but with a distinct pronunciation, "He is my father." The gardener fell back a pace and shrieked like a madman. "She speaks! Is it possible? Is it possible? She speaks! Can you speak, my child? Can you speak? Say something to me. You can speak!" And he embraced her afresh and kissed her thrice on the brow. "But is it not with signs that she talks, signor? It is not with her fingers? What does this mean?" "No, Signor Vogi," rejoined the teacher, "it is not with signs. That was the old way. Here we teach the new method, the oral method. How is it that you do not know it?" "I know nothing about it," replied the gardener, lost in amazement. "I have been abroad for the last 3 years. Oh, they wrote to me, and I did not understand. I am a blockhead. Oh, my daughter, you understand me then? Do you hear my voice? Answer me. Do you hear me? Do you hear what I say?" "Why, no, my good man," said the teacher. "She does not hear your voice, because she is deaf. She understands from the movement of your lips what the words are that you utter. This is the way the thing is managed. But she does not hear your voice any more than she does the words she speaks to you. She pronounces them because we have taught her, letter by letter, how she must place her lips and move her tongue, and what effort to make with her chest and throat, in order to emit a sound." The gardener did not understand, and stood with his mouth wide open. He did not yet believe it. "Tell me, Gigia," he asked his daughter, whispering in her ear, "are you glad that your father has come back?" And he raised his face again, and stood awaiting her reply. The girl looked at him thoughtfully, and said nothing. Her father was troubled. The teacher laughed. Then she said, "My good man, she does not answer you because she did not see the movement of your lips. You spoke in her ear. Repeat your question, keeping your face well before hers." The father, gazing straight in her face, repeated, "Are you glad that your father has come back, that he is not going away again?" The girl, who had watched his lips closely, seeking even to see inside his mouth, replied frankly, "Yes, I am delighted that you have returned, that you are not going away again, never again." Her father embraced her impetuously, and then, in great haste, in order to make quite sure, he overwhelmed her with questions. "What is mamma's name?" "Antonia." "What is the name of your little sister?" "Adeline." "What is the name of this college?" "The Deaf Mute Institution." "How many are 2 times 10?" "20." While we thought that he was laughing for joy, he suddenly burst out crying, but it was from joy. "Take courage," said the teacher to him. "You have reason to rejoice, not to weep. You see that you are making your daughter cry also. You are pleased, then?" The gardener grasped the teacher's hand and kissed it 2 or 3 times, saying, "Thank you for 100 times, 1,000 times, dear Signora Teacher, and forgive me for not knowing how to say anything else." "But she not only speaks," said the teacher. "Your daughter also knows how to write. She knows how to reckon. She knows the names of all the common objects. She knows a little history and geography. She is now in the regular class. When she has passed through the 2 remaining classes, she will know much more. When she leaves here, she will be in a condition to adopt a profession. We already have deaf mutes who stand in the shops to serve customers, and they perform their duties like anyone else." Again the gardener was astounded. It seemed as though his ideas were becoming confused again. He stared at his daughter and scratched his head. His face demanded another explanation. Then the teacher turned to the attendant and said to him, "Call a child of the preparatory class for me." The attendant returned in a short time with the deaf mute of 8 or 9 years, who had entered the institution a few days before. "This girl," said the mistress, "is one of those whom we are instructing in the first elements. This is the way it is done. I want to make her say E. Pay attention." The teacher opened her mouth as one opens it to pronounce the vowel E, and motioned to the child to open her mouth in the same manner. Then the mistress made her a sign to throw out her voice. She did so, but instead of E she pronounced O. "No," said the mistress, "that is not right." And taking the child's hand, she placed one of them on her own throat and the other on her chest, and repeated E. The child felt with her hands the movements of the mistress's throat, and chest, opened her mouth again as before, and pronounced E correctly. In the same manner the mistress made her pronounce C and D, still keeping the two little hands on her own throat and chest. "Now do you understand?" she inquired. The father understood, but he seemed more astonished than before. "And they are taught to speak in the same way?" he asked, after a moment of reflection, gazing at the teacher. "You have the patience to teach them to speak in that manner, little by little, and so many of them, one by one, through years and years. But you are saints, that's what you are. You are angels of paradise. There is not in the world a reward that is worthy of you. What is there that I can say? Ah, leave me alone with my daughter a little while now. Let me have her to myself for 5 minutes." And drawing her to a seat apart, he began to question her, and she to reply, and he laughed with beaming eyes, slapping his fist down on his knees. He took his daughter's hand and stared at her, beside himself with delight at hearing her, as though her voice had been one which came from heaven. Then he asked the teacher, "Would the Signor Director permit me to thank him?" "The director is not here," replied the mistress. "But there is another person whom you should thank. Every little girl here is given into the charge of an older companion, who acts the part of the sister or mother to her. Your little girl has been entrusted to the care of a deaf mute of 17, the daughter of a baker, who is kind to and very fond of her. She has been assisting her for 2 years to dress herself every morning. She combs her hair, she teaches her to sew, she mends her clothes, she is good company for her. Lugia, what is the name of your mamma in the institute?" The girl smiled and said, "Caterina Giordano," she said to her father. "She is very, very good." The attendant, who had withdrawn at a signal from the mistress, returned almost at once, with a light-haired deaf mute, a robust girl with a cheerful countenance, and also dressed in a red and white striped stuff, with a grey apron. She paused at the door and blushed. Then she bent her head with a smile. She had the figure of a woman, but seemed like a girl. Giorgio's daughter instantly ran to her, took her by the arm like a child, and drew her to her father, saying in her heavy voice, "Caterina Giordano." "Ah, what a good girl!" exclaimed her father, and he stretched out one hand to caress her, but drew it back again, and repeated, "Ah, what a good girl! May God bless her! May He grant her all good fortune, all consolation! May He make her and hers always happy, since she has been so good to my poor Gigia. It is an honest working man, the poor father of a family, who wishes you this with all his heart." The big girl petted the little one, still keeping her face bent and smiling, and the gardener continued to gaze at her as at a Madonna. "You can take your daughter with you for the class," said the mistress. "Won't I take her, though?" rejoined the gardener. "I'll take her to Condove, and fetch her back to-morrow morning. Think for a bit whether I won't take her." The girl ran off to dress. "It is 3 years since I have seen her," repeated the gardener. "Now she speaks. I will take her to Condove with me this minute. But first I shall take a walk about Turin with my deaf mute on my arm, so that all may see her, and I shall take her to see some of my friends. Ah, what a beautiful day! This is consolation indeed. Here is your father's arm, my Gigia." The girl, who had returned with the little mantle and cap on, took his arm. "And thanks to all," said the father, as he reached the threshold. "Thanks to all, with my whole soul. I shall come back another time to thank you all again." He stood for a moment in thought, and then turned abruptly from the girl, came back, fumbling in his waistcoat with his hand, and shouted like a man in a fury, "Come now, I am not a poor devil, so here I leave 20 lire for the institution, a fine new gold piece." And with a tremendous bang he left his gold piece on the table. "No, no, my good man," said the mistress with emotion. "Take back your money. I cannot accept it. Take it back. It is not my place. You shall see about that when the director is here, but he will not accept anything either, be sure of that. You have toiled too hard to earn it, poor man. We shall be greatly obliged to you all the same." "No, I shall leave it," replied the gardener obstinately, "and then we will see." But the mistress put his money back in his pocket without leaving him time to reject it. So he gave up with a shake of the head, and then throwing a kiss to the mistress, and to the older girl he quickly took his daughter's arm and hurried with her out of the door, saying, "Come, come, my daughter, my poor dumb child, my treasure!" And the girl exclaimed in her harsh voice, "Oh, how beautiful the sun is!" End of section 21. Recording by Kristin Lewis, Houston, Texas. Section 22 of Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kristin Lewis, Houston, Texas. Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal by Edmondo de AMICIS. Translated by Isabel, Florence, HAPGOOD. June, Garibaldi. June 3rd. Tomorrow's National Festival Day. Today is a day of national mourning. Garibaldi died last night. Do you know who he is? He is the man who freed 10 millions of Italians from the tyranny of the Bourbons. He died at the age of 75. He was born at Nice, the son of a ship captain. At 8 years of age, he saved a woman's life. At 13, he dragged into safety a boatload of his companions who were shipwrecked. At 27, he saved a drowning youth at Marseilles. At 41, he saved a ship from burning on the ocean. He fought for 10 years in America for the liberty of the foreign people. He fought in 3 wars against the Austrians for the liberation of Lombardy and Trentino. He defended Rome from the French in 1849. He liberated Naples and Palermo in 1860. He fought again for Rome in 1867, and fought against the Germans in defense of France in 1870. He was possessed of a flame of heroism and the genius of war. He was engaged in 40 battles and won 37 of them. When he was not fighting, he was working for his living, or he shut himself up in a solitary island and tilled the soil. He was a teacher, sailor, workman, trader, soldier, general, dictator. He was simple, great, and good. He hated all oppressors. He loved all people. He protected all the weak. He had no other aspiration than good. He refused honors. He scorned death. He adored Italy. When he uttered his war cry, legions of valiant men hastened to him from all quarters. Gentlemen left their palaces, workmen their ships, youth their schools to go and fight in the sunshine of his glory. In time of war he wore a red shirt. He was a blonde, strong, and handsome. On the field of battle he was a thunderbolt. In his affections he was a child. In affliction he was a saint. Thousands of Italians have died for their country, happy, if when dying they saw him pass, victorious in the distance. Thousands would have allowed themselves to be killed for him. Millions have blessed and will bless him. He is dead. The whole world mourns him. You do not appreciate him now, but you will read of his deeds. You will constantly hear him spoken of in the course of your life, and gradually, as you grow up, his image will grow before you. When you become a man, you will behold him as a giant. And when you are no longer in the world, when your sons' sons and those who shall be born of them are no longer among the living, the generations will still behold on high his luminous head as a redeemer of the people, crowned by the names of his victories as with a circlet of stars, and the brow and soul of every Italian will beam when he utters his name. Your father. The Army, Sunday 9th. The National Festival Day, postponed for a week on account of the death of Garibaldi. We have been to the Piazza Castello to see the review of soldiers who filed before the commandant of the Army Corps, between 2 long lines of people. As they marched past, too, the sound of the trumpets and the bands, my father pointed out to me the corps and the glories of the banners. First, the pupils of the academy, those who will become officers in the engineers and the artillery, about 300 in number, dressed in black, passed with the bold, easy elegance of students and soldiers. After them defiled the infantry, the brigade of Aosta, which fought at Giotto and San Martino, and the Bergamo brigade, which fought at Castelfranco d'Argo, 4 regiments of them, Company after company, thousands of red aiguillettes, which seemed like so many double and very long garlands of blood-colored flowers, extended and shaken from the two ends and borne across the crowd. After the infantry, the soldiers of the mining corps advanced, the working men of war, with their plumes of black horsetails and their crimson bands. And while these were passing, we beheld advancing behind them hundreds of long, straight plumes, which rose above the heads of the spectators. They were the Alpine troops, the defender of the portals of Italy, all tall, rosy, and stalwart, with hats of Calabrian fashion, and labels of a beautiful bright green, the color of the grass on their native mountains. The mountaineers were still marching past when a stir ran through the crowd, and the Bersaglieri, the old 12th Battalion, the first to enter Rome through the breach of the Porta Pia, bronzed, alert, brisk, with fluttering plumes, passed like a wave in a sea of black, making the piazza ring with the shrill blast of their trumpets, which seemed like shouts of joy, but their trumpeting was drowned by a broken and hollow rumble, which announced the field artillery, and the latter passed in triumph, seated on their lofty caissons, drawn by 300 teams of fierce horses, whose fine soldiers with yellow lacing, and their long cannons of brass and steel, gleaming on the light carriages as they jolted and resounded and made the earth tremble. Then came the mountain artillery, slowly, gravely, fine in its heavy, solid way, with its large soldiers and its powerful mules, that mountain artillery which carries dismay and death wherever man can set his foot. And last of all, the fine regiment of the Genoese cavalry, which had wheeled down like a whirlwind on 10 fields of battle, from Santa Lucia to Villafranca, passed at the gallop, their helmets glittering in the sun, their lances erect, their pennons floating in the air, sparkling with gold and silver, filling the air with jingling and neighing. "How beautiful it is!" I exclaimed. My father almost reproved me for the words, and said, "You are not to regard the army as a fine show. All these young men, so full of strength and hope, may be called upon any day to defend our country, and fall in a few hours, crushed to fragments by bullets and grape shot. Every time that you hear the cry at a feast, 'Hooray for the army! Hooray for Italy!' picture to yourself behind the regiments which are passing a plain covered with corpse and red with blood, and then the greeting to the army will proceed from the very depths of your heart, and the image of Italy will appear to you more severe and grand." Italy, Tuesday, 13th. Salute your country on days of festivals thus: "Italy, my country, dear and noble land, where my father and my mother were born, and where they will be buried, where I hope to live and die, where my children will grow up and die. Beautiful Italy, great and glorious for many centuries, united and free for the past few years, who has scattered so great a light of intellect divine over the world, and for whom so many valiant men have died on the battlefield, and so many heroes on the gallows, august mother of 300 cities, and 30 millions of sons, I, a child, who do not understand you as yet, and who do not know you in your entirety, venerate and love you with all my soul, and am proud of having been born of you, and of calling myself your son. I love your splendid seas and sublime mountains. I love your solemn monuments and immortal memories. I love your glory and beauty. I love and venerate the whole of you as much as that beloved portion where I, for the first time, beheld the light and heard your name. I love the whole of you with a single affection, and with equal gratitude. Turin the valiant, Julena the superior, Bologna the learned, Venice the enchanting, Milan the mighty. I love with the reverence of a son, gentle Florence, and terrible Palermo, immense and beautiful Naples, marvelous and eternal Rome. I love you, my sacred country, and I swear that I will love all your sons like brothers, and that I will always honor in my heart your great men living and dead, and that I will be industrious and honest citizen, constantly intent on ennobling myself, in order to render myself worthy of you, to assist with my small powers in causing misery, ignorance, injustice, crime, to disappear one day from your face, so that you may live and grow quietly in the majesty of your right and of your strength. I swear that I will serve you, as it may be granted to me, with my mind, with my arm, with my heart, humbly, ardently, and that if the day should dawn on which I should be called on to give my blood and my life for you, I will give my blood and I will die, crying your holy name to heaven, and wafting my last kiss to your blessed banner. Your father. 32 degrees. Friday, 16th. During the 5 days which have passed since the National Festival, the heat has increased by 3 degrees. We are in full summer now, and begin to feel weary. All have lost their fine rosy color of springtime. Necks and legs are growing thin. Heads droop and eyes close. Poor Nelly, who suffers much from the heat, has turned the color of wax in the face. He sometimes falls into a heavy sleep with his head on his copybook. But Graynz is always watchful and places an open book in front of him so that the master cannot see him. Cross he rests his red head against the bench in a certain way, so that it looks as though it had been taken from his body and placed there separately. Nobis complains that there are too many of us and that we spoil the air. Ah, what an effort it costs now to study! I gaze through the window at those beautiful trees which cast so deep a shade, where I should be so glad to run, and sadness and impatience overwhelm me at being obliged to go and shut myself up among the benches. But then I take courage at the sight of my kind mother, who is always watching me when I return from school, to see whether I am not pale, and at every page of my work she says to me, "Do you still feel well?" And every morning at 6, when she wakes me for my lesson, "Courage, there are only so many days more, then you will be free and will get rested. You will go to the shade of country lanes." Yes, she is perfectly right to remind me of the boys who are working in the field, in the full heat of the sun, among the white sands of the river, which blind and scorch them, and those in the glass factories, who stand all day long, motionless, with head bent over a flame of glass, and all of them rise earlier than we do, and have no vacations. Courage, then. Even in this respect, Derossi is at the head of all, for he suffers neither from heat nor drowsiness. He is always wide awake and cheery, with his golden curls, as he was in the winter, and he studies without effort, and keeps all about him alert, as though he freshened the air with his voice. There are 2 others also who are always awake and attentive. Stubborn Stardi, who pinches his face to keep from going to sleep, and the more weary and heated he is, the more he sets his teeth, and he opens his eyes so wide that it seems as though he wanted to eat the teacher, and that traitor of Garoffi, who is worldly absorbed in manufacturing fans out of red paper, decorated with little figures from matchboxes, which he sells at 2 centesimi apiece. But the bravest of all is Coretti. Poor Coretti! He gets up at 5 o'clock to help his father carry wood. At 11 in school he can no longer keep his eyes open, and his head droops on his breast. Nevertheless, he shakes himself, punches himself on the back of the neck, asks permission to go out and wash his face, and makes his neighbors shake and pinch him. But this morning he could not resist, and fell into a heavy sleep. The teacher called him loudly. "Coretti!" He did not hear. The teacher, irritated, repeated, "Coretti!" Then the son of the charcoal man who lives next to him at home rose and said, "He worked from 5 till 7 carrying wood." The teacher allowed him to sleep on, and continued with the lesson for half an hour. Then he went to Coretti's seat and awakened him very, very gently by blowing in his face. On seeing the master in front of him, he startled back in alarm, but the master shook his head in his hands and said, as he stroked his hair, "I am not reproving you, my son. Your sleep is not at all that of laziness. It is the sleep of fatigue." My father. Saturday, 17th. Surely neither your comrade Coretti or Garrone would ever have answered their father as you have answered yours this afternoon. Enrico, how is that possible? You must promise me solemnly that this shall never happen again, so long as I live. Every time that an impenitent reply flies to your lips at reproof from your father, think of this day, which will surely come, when he will call you to his bedside to tell you, 'Enrico, I am about to leave you.' Oh, my son, when you hear his voice for the last time, and for a long time, while afterwards, when you weep alone in his deserted room, in the midst of those books which you will never open again, then, on recalling that you have at times been wanting in respect of him, you too will ask yourself, 'How is it possible?' Then you will understand that he has always been your best friend, that when he was constrained to punish you, it caused him more suffering than it did you, and that he never made you weep except for the sake of doing you good. And then you will repent, and you will kiss with tears that desk at which he worked so much, at which he wore out his life for his children. You do not understand now. He hides from you all of himself, except his kindness and his love. You do not know that he is sometimes so broken down with toil that he thinks he has only a few more days to live, and that at such moments he talks only of you. He has in his heart no more trouble than that of leaving you poor and without protection. And how often, when meditating on this, does he enter your room while you are asleep and stand there, lamp in hand, gazing at you, and then he makes an effort, and weary and sad as he is, he returns to his labor. Neither do you know that he often seeks you and remains with you because he has a bitterness in his heart, sorrows which attack all men in the world, and he seeks you as a friend, to obtain consolation himself in forgetfulness, and he feels the need of taking refuge in your affection, to recover his serenity and his courage. Think then what must be his sorrow when, instead of finding in your affection, he finds coldness and disrespect. Never again stain yourself with this horrible ingratitude. Reflect that you were as good as a saint. You could never repay him sufficiently for what he has done, and for what he is constantly doing for you. And reflect also, we cannot count on life. A misfortune might remove your father while you are still a boy, in 2 years and 3 months, tomorrow. Ah, my poor Enrico, when you see all about you changing, how empty, how desolate the house will appear, with your poor mother clothed in black. Go, my son, go to your father. He is in his room at work. Go on, tiptoe, that he may not hear you enter. Go and lay your forehead on his knees, and ask him to pardon and to bless you. Your mother. In the country, Monday, 19th. My good father forgave me on this occasion also, and allowed me to go on an expedition to the country, which had been arranged on Wednesday with the father of Cuore, the wood peddler. We were all in need of a mouthful of mountain air. It was a holiday. We met at 2 o'clock in the place of the statue. Derossi, Garrone, Girolfi, Precossi, Coretti, father and son, and I with our provisions of fruit, sausages, and hard-boiled eggs. We also carried leather bottles and tin cups. Garrone carried a gourd filled with white wine, Coretti, his father's soldier, canteen full of red wine, and little Precossi in the blacksmith's blouse held under his arm a 2-kilogramme loaf. We went in the omnibus as far as the Gran Madre di Dio, and then off as briskly as possible to the hills. How green, how shady, how fresh it was! We rolled over and over in the grass. We dipped our faces in the rivulets. We leaped the hedges. The elder Coretti followed us at a distance, with his jacket thrown over his shoulders, smoking his clay pipe, and from time to time threatening us with his hand to prevent our tearing holes in our trousers. Precossi whistled. I have never heard him whistle before. The younger Coretti did the same as he went along. That little fellow can make anything with his jackknife, mill wheels, forks, squirts. He insisted on carrying the other boys' things, and he was loaded down until he was dripping with perspiration, but he was still as nimble as a goat. Derossi halted every moment to tell us the names of the plants and insects. I don't see how he manages to know so many things. Garrone nibbled at his bread in silence, but he no longer attacks it with the cheery bites of old. Poor Garrone, now that he has lost his mother! But he is always as good as bread himself. When one of us went back for a running start to leap a ditch, he ran to the other side and held out his hands to us. And since Precossi is afraid of cows, having been tossed by one when a child, Garrone places himself in front of him every time that we pass any. We mounted up to San Margherita, and then went down the decline by leaps, rolls, and slides. Precossi stumbled into a thorn bush and tore a hole in his blouse, and stood there shamefacedly with the strip dangling. But Garoffi, who always has pins in his jacket, fixed it so that it was not to be seen, while the others kept saying, excuse me, and then he set off to run once more. Garoffi did not waste his time on the way. He picked salad herbs and snails, and put every stone that glistened the least bit in his packet, supposing that there was gold and silver in it. And on we went, running, rolling, and climbing through the shade and in the sun, up and down, through all the lanes and crossroads, until we arrived, tumbled and breathless, at the crest of a hill, where we seated ourselves to take our lunch on the grass. We could see an immense plain and all the blue Alps with their white summits. We were almost dying of hunger. The bread seemed to be melting. The elder Coretti handed us our portions of sausage on gourd leaves, and then we all began to talk at once about the teachers, the comrades who had not been able to come, and the examinations. Precossi was rather ashamed to eat, and Garrone thrust the last bits of his share into his mouth by force. Coretti was seated next to his father with his legs crossed. They seemed more like two brothers than father and son, when seen thus together, both rosy and smiling with those white teeth of theirs. The father drank with zest, emptying the bottles and the cups which we left half finished, and said: "Wine hurts you boys who are studying. It is the wood sellers who need it." Then he grasped his son by the nose and shook him, remarking: "Boys, you must love this fellow, for he is a flower of a man of honor. I tell you so myself." And then we all laughed, except Garrone, and he went on as he drank: "It is a shame, eh? Now you are all good friends together, and in a few years, who knows, Enrico and Derossi will be lawyers or professors, or I don't know what, and the other four of you will be in shops or at a trade, and the deuce knows where, and then good night, comrades." "Nonsense," rejoined Derossi. "For me, Garrone will always be Garrone, Precossi will always be Precossi, and the same with all the others. Were I to become the Emperor of Russia, where they are, there I shall go also." "Bless you!" exclaimed the elder Coretti, raising his flask. "That's the way to talk, by heavens! Touch your glass here. Hooray for brave comrades, and hooray for school, which makes one family of you, of those who have and those who have not." We all clinked his flask with the skins and the cups, and drank for the last time. "Hooray for the 4th of the 49th!" he cried, as he rose to his feet, and swallowed the last drop. "And if you have to do with squadrons, too, see that you stand firm, like us old ones, my lads." It was already late. We descended, running and singing, and walking long distances, all arm in arm, and we arrived at the Po as twilight fell, and thousands of fireflies were flittering about, and we only parted in the Piazza dello Statuto, after having agreed to meet there on the following Sunday, and go to Victor Emmanuel to see the distribution of prizes to the graduates of the evening schools. End of Section 22. Recording by Kristin Lewis, Houston, Texas. Section 23 of Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kristin Lewis, Houston, Texas. Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal. By Edmondo de AMICIS, translated by Isabel, Florence, HAPGOOD. Chapter June. The distribution of prizes. What a beautiful day! How happy I should have been had I not encountered my schoolmistress. I met her coming down the staircase of our house almost in the dark, and as soon as she recognized me, she took both my hands and whispered in my ear: "Good-bye, Enrico. Remember me." I saw that she was weeping. I went up and told my mother about it. "I have just met my schoolmistress." "She was just going to bed," replied my mother, whose eyes were red, and then she added very sadly, looking straight at me: "Your teacher is very ill." The distribution of prizes to the working men, Sunday, 25th. As we had agreed, we all went together to the Theatre Victor Emmanuel to view the distribution of prizes to the working men. The theatre was adorned, as on the 14th of March, and thronged, but almost wholly with the families of workmen, and the pit was occupied by male and female pupils of the school of choral singing. They sang a hymn to the soldiers who had died in the Crimea, which was so beautiful that, when it was all finished, all rose and clapped and shouted, so that the song had to be repeated from the beginning. Then the prize winners began to march past the mayor, the prefect, and many others who represented the books, savings bank books, diplomas, and medals. In one corner of the pit I espied the little mason sitting beside his mother. In another place there was the principal, beside him the redhead of my teacher of the 2nd grade. The first who passed were the pupils of the evening drawing classes, the goldsmith, engravers, lithographers, carpenters, and masons, then those of the commercial school, then those of the musical limecum, among them several girls, working women, all dressed in festival attire and smiling, who were saluted with great applause. Last came the pupils of the elementary evening schools. It was a fine sight. They were of all ages, of all trades, and dressed in all sorts of ways. Men with gray hair, factory boys, artisans with big black beards. The little ones were at their ease, the men a little embarrassed. The people clapped the oldest and the youngest, but none of the spectators laughed, as they did at our festivals. All faces were attentive and serious. Many of the prize winners had wives and children in the pit, and there were little children who, when they saw their father pass across the stage, called him by name at the top of their voices, and signaled to him with their hands, laughing loudly. Peasants passed, and porters. They were from the Bucom Pagny school, from the Cittadella school. There was a bootblack whom my father knew, and the prefect gave him a diploma. After him I saw approaching a man as big as a giant, whom I fancied that I had seen several times before. It was the father of the little mason, who had won the 2nd prize. I remembered when I had seen him in the garret, at the bedside of his sick son, and I immediately sought out his son in the pit. Poor little mason! He was staring at his father with beaming eyes, and in order to hide his feelings, he made his hare's face. At that moment I heard a burst of applause, and I glanced at the stage. A little chimney sweep stood there with a clean face, but in his working clothes, and the mayor was holding him by the hand and talking to him. After the chimney sweep came a cook, then one of the city sweepers from the Rainier school, to get a prize. I felt I know not what in my heart, something like a great affection and a great respect, at the thought of how much those prizes had cost all those working men, fathers of families full of care, how much toil added to their labors, how many hours snatched from their sleep, of which they stand in such great need, and what efforts of minds not used to study, and of huge hands made clumsy with work. A factory boy passed, and it was evident that his father had lent him his jacket for the occasion, for his sleeves hung down so that he was forced to turn them back while on the stage, in order to receive his prize. And many laughed, but the laugh was speedily stifled by the applause. Next came an old man with a bald head and a white beard. Several artillery soldiers passed from among those who attended evening school in our schoolhouse. Then came custom house guards and policemen among those who guard our schools. At the conclusion, the pupils of the evening schools again sang the hymn to the dead in the Crimea, for this time with so much dash, with a strength of affection which came so directly from the heart, that the audience hardly applauded at all, but went away in a deep emotion, slowly and quietly. In a few moments the whole street was thronged. In front of the entrance to the theatre was the chimney sweep, with his prize book bound in red, and all around were gentlemen talking to him. Many exchanged greetings from the opposite side of the street, workmen, boys, policemen, teachers. My teacher of the 2nd grade came out in the midst of the crowd, between 2 artillerymen, and there were workmen's wives with babies in their arms, who held in their tiny hands their father's diploma, and exhibited to the crowd in their pride. My dead schoolmistress, Tuesday, 27th. While we were at the theater, Victor Emanuel, my poor schoolmistress, died. She died at 2 o'clock, a week after she had come to see my mother. The principal came to school yesterday to announce it to us, and he said, "Those of you who were her pupils knew how good she was, how she loved her boys. She was a mother to them. Now she is no more. For a long time a terrible malady had been sapping her life. If she had not been obliged to work to earn her bread, she could have taken care of herself. I would perhaps recovered. At all events, she could have prolonged her life for several months if she had obtained a leave of absence. But she wished to remain among her boys to the very last day. On the evening of Saturday, the 17th, she took leave of them, with the certainty that she should never see them again. She gave them a good advice, kissed them all, and went away sobbing. No one will ever see her again. Remember her, my boys." Little Precassi, who had been one of her pupils in the upper primary, dropped his head on his desk and began to cry. Yesterday afternoon, after school, we all went together to the house of the dead woman, to accompany her body to church. There was a hearse in the street with 2 horses, and many people were waiting and conversing in a low voice. There was the principal, and all the masters and mistresses of our school, and from the other schoolhouses where she had taught in bygone years. There were nearly all of the little children in her classes, led by the hand by their mothers, who carried tapers, and there were a very great many from the other classes, and 50 scholars from the Baretti school, some with wreaths in their hands, some with bunches of roses. A great many bouquets of flowers had already been placed on the hearse, among which was fastened a large wreath of acacia, with an inscription in black letters, "The old pupils of the 4th grade to their mistress," and then under the large wreath a little one was suspended, which the babies had brought. Among the crowd were seen many servant women who had been sent by their mistresses with candles, and there were also 2 serving men in livery with lighted torches, and a wealthy gentleman, the father of one of the mistress's scholars, had sent his carriage lined with blue satin. All were crowded together near the door. Several girls were wiping away their tears. We waited for a while in silence. At length the casket was brought out. Some of the little ones began to cry loudly when they saw the coffin put into the hearse, and one began to shriek, as though he had only then realized that his mistress was dead. And he was seized with such a convulsive fit of sobbing that they were obliged to carry him away. The procession got slowly in line and set out. First came the daughters of Retiro della Concezione, dressed in green, then the daughters of Maria, all in white, with a blue ribbon, then the priest, and behind the hearse the masters and mistresses, the tiny scholars of the upper primary, and all the others. And at the end of all the crowd, people came to the windows and to the doors, and on seeing all those boys and the wreath, they said, "It is a schoolmistress." Even some of the ladies who went with the smallest children wept. When the church was reached, the casket was removed from the hearse and carried to the middle of the nave, in front of the great altar. The mistresses laid their wreaths on it, the children covered it with flowers, and the people all about, with lighted candles in their hands, began to chant the prayers in the vast and gloomy church. Then all of a sudden, when the priest had said the last Amen, the candles were extinguished, and all went away in haste, and the mistress was left alone. Poor mistress, who was so kind to me, who had so much patience, who had toiled for so many years, for she has left to her scholars her little books and everything which she possessed, to one an inkstand, to another a little pitcher. 2 days before her death she said to the headmaster that he was not to allow the smallest of them to go to her funeral, because she did not wish for them to cry. She has done good, she has suffered, she is dead. Poor mistress, left alone in the dark church. Farewell, farewell forever, my kind friend. Sad and sweet memory of my childhood. Thanks. Wednesday, 28th. My poor schoolmistress wanted to finish her year of school. She departed only 3 days before the end of the lessons. Day after tomorrow we go once more to the schoolhouse to hear the reading of the monthly story, The Shipwreck, and then it is over. On Saturday, the 1st of July, the examinations begin. and then another year. The 4th is past. If my mistress had not died, it would have passed well. I thought over all that I had known on the preceding October, and it seems to me that I know a good deal more. I have so many new things in my mind. I can say and write what I think better than I could then. I can also do the sums of many grown-up men who know nothing about it, and help them in their affairs. I understand much more. I remember nearly everything that I read. I am satisfied. But how many people have urged me on and helped me to learn, one in one way, and another in another, at home, at school, and in the street, everywhere where I have been and where I have seen everything, and now I thank you all. I thank you first, my good teacher, for having been so indulgent and affectionate with me. For you, every new acquisition of mine was a labor, for which I now rejoice and of which I am proud. I thank you, Derossi, my admirable friend, for your prompt and kind explanations, for you have made me understand many of the most difficult things, and to overcome stumbling blocks at examinations. And you too, Starday, you brave and strong boy, who have shown me how a will of iron succeeds in everything. And you, kind, good Godani, who make all those who know you kind and good too. And you too, Procassi and Correri, who have given me an example of courage in suffering and of serenity in toil. I return thanks to you, and thanks to all the rest. But above all, I thank you, my father, my first teacher, my first friend, who have given me so many wise counsels, and taught me so many things, while you were working for me, always concealing your sadness from me, and seeking in all ways to render study easy, and life beautiful to me. And you, sweet mother, my beloved and blessed guardian angel, who have tasted all my joys and suffered all my bitternesses, who have studied, worked, and wept with me, with one hand on my brow, and with the other pointing me to heaven. I kneel before you as when I was a little child, and I thank you for all the tenderness which you have instilled in my mind through 12 years of sacrifices and love. The Shipwreck. Last monthly story. One morning in the month of December, several years ago, there sailed from the port of Liverpool a huge steamer, which had on board 200 persons, including a crew of 70. The captain and nearly all the sailors were English. Among the passengers there were several Italians, 3 gentlemen, a priest, and a company of musicians. The steamer was bound for the island of Malta. The weather was threatening. Among the third-class passengers forward was an Italian lad of 12, small for his age, but robust. A bold, handsome, stern face of a Sicily type. He was alone near the foremast, seated on a coil of cordage beside a well-worn vase, which contained his effects, and among which he kept a hand. His complexion was brown, and his black and wavy hair descended to his shoulders. He was meanly clad, and had a tattered mantle thrown over his shoulders, and an old leather brown pouch on a cross-belt. He gazed thoughtfully about him at the passengers, the ship, the sailors who were running past, and at the restless sea. He had the appearance of a boy who had lately gone through a great family sorrow, the face of a child, the expression of a man. A little after their departure, one of the steamer's crew, an Italian with gray hair, made his appearance on the bow, holding by the hand a little girl, and coming to halt in front of the little Sicilian, he said, "Here's a travelling companion for you, Mario." Then he went away. The girl seated herself on the pile of cordage beside the boy. They looked at each other. "Where are you going?" asked the Sicilian. The girl replied, "To Malta on the way to Naples." Then she added, "I'm going to see my father and mother, who are expecting me." "My name is Gillietta Flagiani." The boy said nothing. After the lapse of a few minutes he drew some bread from his pouch and some dried fruit. The girl had some biscuits. They began to eat. "Look sharp there!" shouted the Italian sailor as he passed rapidly. "A lively time is at hand." The wind continued to increase. The steamer pitched heavily, but the 2 children, who did not suffer from seasickness, paid no heed to it. The little girl smiled. She was about the same age as her companion, but was considerably taller, browner of complexion, slender, somewhat sickly, and dressed very plainly. Her hair was short and curling. She wore a red kerchief over her head and silver rings in her ears. While they ate, they talked about themselves and their affairs. The boy had lost both mother and father. The father, our artisan, had died a few days previously in Liverpool, leaving him alone, and the Italian consul had sent him back to his country, to Palermo, where he had some distant relatives. The little girl had been taken to London the year before by a widowed aunt who was very fond of her, and to whom her parents, poor people, had given her for a time, trusting in the promise of an inheritance. But the aunt had died a few months later, run over by an omnibus without leaving a centesimo, and then she too had had the recourse to the consul, who had shipped her to Italy. Both had been recommended to the care of the Italian sailor. So, concluded the little maid, my father and mother thought that I would return rich, and instead I am returning poor. But they will love me all the same, and so will my brothers. I have 4 of them, all small. I am the oldest at home. I dress them. They will be glad to see me. I will come in on tiptoe. The sea is ugly. Then she asked the boy, "And are you going to stay with your relatives?" "Yes, if they want me." "Do they not love you?" "I don't know." "I shall be 13 at Christmas," said the girl. Then they began to talk about the sea and the people on board around them. They remained near each other all day, exchanging a few words now and then. The passengers thought them brother and sister. The girl knitted at a stocking, the boy meditated, and the sea continued to grow rougher. At night, as they parted, the little girl said to Mario, "Sleep well." "No one will sleep well, my poor children," exclaimed the Italian soldier as he ran past, in answer to a call from the captain. The boy was on the point of replying with a good night to his little friend, when an unexpected dash of water dealt him a violent blow, and flung him against a seat. "Dear me, you are bleeding!" cried the girl, running to him. The passengers who were making their escape below paid no heed to them. The child knelt down beside Mario, who had been stunned by the blow, wiped the blood from his brow, and pulling the red handkerchief from her hair, she bound it about his head, then pressed his head to her breast in order to knot the ends, and thus received a spot of blood on her yellow dress, just above the girdle. Mario shook his head and rose. "Are you better?" asked the girl. "I no longer feel it," he replied. "Sleep well," said Giulietta. "Good night," responded Mario, and they descended 2 steps to their dormitories. The sailor's prediction proved correct. Before they could get to sleep, a frightful tempest had broken loose. It was a sudden onslaught of furious billows, which in the course of a few minutes split one mast and carried away 3 boats that were suspended to the falls, and 4 cows on the bow, like leaves. On board the steamer there arose a confusion, a terror, an uproar, and a tempest of shrieks, wails, and prayers, sufficient to make the hair stand on end. The storm continued in fury all night. At daybreak it was still increasing. The formidable waves, dashing the craft transversely, broke over the deck, and smashed, split, hurled everything into the sea. The platform, which screamed, the engine was destroyed, and the water dashed with a terrible roar. The fires were put out, the engineers fled, huge and raging streams forced their way everywhere. A voice of thunder shouted, "To the pumps!" It was the captain's voice. The sailors rushed to the pumps, but the sudden burst of a sea, striking the vessel on the stern, demolished bulwarks and hatchways and sent a flood within. All the passengers, more dead than alive, had taken refuge in the grand saloon. At last the captain appeared. "Captain, captain!" they all shrieked together. "What is taking place? Where are we? Is there any hope? Save us!" The captain waited until they were silent, then said coolly, "Let us be resigned." One woman uttered a cry of mercy. No one else could give vent to a sound. Terror had frozen them all. A long time passed thus, in a silence like that of a grave. All gazed at each other with blanched faces. The sea continued to rage and roar. The vessel pitched heavily. At one moment the captain attempted to launch one lifeboat. 5 sailors entered it. The boat sank. The waves turned it over, and 2 of the sailors were drowned. among them the Italian. The others contrived with difficulty to catch hold of the ropes and draw themselves up again. After this, the sailors themselves lost all courage. 2 hours later, the vessel was sunk in the water to the portholes. A terrible scene was presented meanwhile on the deck. Mothers pressed their children to their breast in despair. Friends embraced and bade each other farewell. Some went down into the cabins that they might die without seeing the sea. One passenger shot himself in the head with a pistol and fell headlong down the stairs to the cabin where he expired. Many clung frantically to each other. Women withered in convulsions. Above all was heard a chorus of sobs, of infantile laments, of strange and piercing voices, and here and there persons stood motionless as statues, in stupor, with eyes dilated and sightless, faces of corpse and madmen. The 2 children, Giulietta and Mario, clung to a mast and gazed at the sea, with staring eyes as though senseless. The sea had calmed a little, but the vessel continued to sink slowly. Only a few minutes remained to them. "Launch the longboat," shouted the captain. A boat, the last that remained, was thrown into the water, and 14 sailors and 3 passengers got into it. The captain remained on board. "Come with us," they shouted to him from below. "I must die at my post," replied the captain. "We shall meet a vessel," the sailors cried. "We shall be saved. Come down, you are lost." "I shall remain." "There is room for one more," shouted the sailors, turning to the other passengers. "A woman?" A woman advanced, aided by the captain, but on seeing the distance at which the boat lay, she did not have the courage to leap down, but fell back among the deck. The other women had nearly all fainted and were as dead. "A boy!" shouted the sailors. At that shout, the Sicilian lad and his companion, who had remained up to that moment petrified in a supernatural stupor, were suddenly roused again by a violent instinct to save their lives. They left the mast and rushed together to the side of the vessel, shrieking, "Take me!" and trying in turn to drive the other back like furious beasts. "The smaller!" shouted the sailors. "The boat is overloaded. The smaller!" On hearing these words, the girl dropped her arms as though struck by lightning and stood motionless, staring at Mario with lustrous eyes. Mario looked at her for a moment, saw the spot of blood on her bodice, remembered. The gleam of a divine thought flashed across his face. "The smaller!" shouted the sailor again impatiently. "We are going." And then Mario, with a voice which no longer seemed his own, cried, "She is the lighter. It is for you, Giulietta. You have a father and a mother. I am alone. I give you my place. Go down." "Throw her into the sea!" shouted the sailors. Mario seized Giulietta by the body and threw her into the sea. The girl uttered a cry and made a splash. A sailor seized her by the arm and dragged her into the boat. The boy remained at the vessel's side with his head held high, his hair streaming in the wind, motionless, tranquil, sublime. The boat moved off just in time to escape the whirlpool made by the vessel as it sank, and which threatened to overturn it. Then the girl, who had been stunned until that moment, raised her eyes to the boy and burst into a storm of tears. "Good-bye, Mario," she cried amid her sobs, with her arms outstretched toward him. "Good-bye, good-bye, good-bye." "Good-bye," replied the boy, raising his hand. The boat went swiftly away across the troubled sea beneath the dark sky. No one on board the vessel shouted any longer. The water was lapping the edges of the deck. Suddenly the boy fell on his knees, with his hands folded and his eyes raised to heaven. The girl covered her face. Then she raised it again. She cast a glance over the sea. The vessel was gone. End of section 23. Recording by Kristin Lewis, Houston, Texas. Section 24 of Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kristin Lewis, Houston, Texas. Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal by Edmondo de Amicis. Translated by Isabel, Florence, HAPGOOD. Chapter, July. The last page from my mother. Saturday, 1st. So the year has come to an end, Enrico, and it is well that you should be left on the last day with the image of the sublime child who gave his life for his friend. You are now about to part from your teachers and companions, and I must impart to you some sad news. The separation will not last 3 months, but forever. Your father, for reasons connected with his profession, is obliged to leave Turin, and we are all to go with him. We shall go next autumn. You will have to enter a new school. You are sorry for this, are you not? For I am sure that you love your old school, or twice a day, for the space of 4 years. You have felt the pleasure of working, or for so long a time you have seen, at stated hours, the same boys, the same teachers, the same parents, and your own father or mother awaiting you with a smile. Your old school, where your mind first unclosed, where you have found so many kind companions, where every word that you have heard has had your good for its object, and where you have not suffered a single trial which has not been useful to you. Then bear this affection with you, and bid the boys a hearty farewell. Some of them will undergo misfortunes. They will soon lose their fathers and mothers. Others will die young. Others, perhaps, will nobly shed their blood in battle. Many will become brave and honest workmen, the fathers of good and industrious workmen, like themselves, and who knows whether they may not also be among them one who will render great services to his country and make his name glorious. Then part from them with affection. Leave a portion of your soul here, in this great family into which you entered as a baby, and from which you emerge a young lad, and which your father and mother loved so dearly, because you were so much beloved by it. School is a mother, my Enrico. It took you from my arms when you could hardly speak, and now it returns you to me strong, good, studious. Blessings on it, and may you never forget it more, my son. Oh, it is impossible that you should forget it. You will become a man. You will make the tour of the world. You will see immense cities and wonderful monuments, and you will remember many among them. But that modest white edifice with those closed shutters, and that little garden where the first flower of your intelligence budded, you will remember until the last day of your life, as I shall remember the house in which I heard your voice for the first time. Your mother. The examinations, Tuesday, 4th. Here are the examinations at last. Nothing is to be heard in the streets in the vicinity of the school from boys, fathers, mothers, and even tutors. Examinations, points, themes, averages, dismissals, promotions, all utter the same words. Yesterday morning there was composition. This morning there is arithmetic. It was touching to see all the parents as they took their sons to school, giving them their last advice in the street. And many mothers went with their sons to their seats to see whether the inkstand was filled and to try their pens, and they still continued to hover round the entrance and to say, "Courage! Attention! I entreat you!" Our assistant master was Coatti, the one with the black beard, who mimics the voice of a lion and never punishes anyone. There were boys who were white with fear. When the teacher broke the seal of the letter from the town hall and drew out the problem, not a breath was audible. He read it loudly, staring now at one, now at another, with terrible eyes. But we knew that had he been able to announce the answer also, so that we might all get promoted, he would have been delighted. After an hour of work, many began to grow weary, for the problem was difficult. One cried. Coraci dealt himself blows on the head. And many of them are not to blame, poor boys, for not knowing, for they have not had much time to study, and have been neglected by their parents. Stardi remained motionless for more than an hour with his eyes on the problem and his fist on his temples, and then he finished the whole thing in 5 minutes. The master made his round, among the benches, saying, "Be calm, be calm. I advise you to be calm." And when he saw that anyone was discouraged, he opened his mouth as though about to devour him like a lion, in order to make him laugh and inspire him with courage. Toward 11 o'clock, peeping down through the blinds, I saw many parents pacing the street in their impatience. There was Precossi's father in his blue blouse, who had deserted his shop, with his face still quite black. There was Crossi's mother, the vegetable vendor, and Nelly's mother, dressed in black, who could not stand still. A little before midday my father arrived and raised his eyes to my window. My dear father! At noon we had all finished, and it was a sight at the close of school. Everyone ran to meet the boys, to ask questions, to turn over the leaves of the copybooks, to compare them with the work of their comrades. How many sums? What is the total? And subtraction? And the answer? And the marking off of decimals? All the masters were running about, summoned in 100 directions. My father took from my hand the rough copy, looked at it, and said, "Very well indeed." Beside us was the blacksmith, Precossi, who was also inspecting his son's work. But rather uneasily and not comprehending it, he turned to my father. "Will you do me the favor to tell me the total?" My father read the number. The other gazed and reckoned. "Brave little one!" he exclaimed in perfect content. And my father and he looked at each other for a moment with a kindly smile, like two friends. My father offered his hand, and the other shook it, and they parted, saying, "Until the oral examination, until the oral examination." After walking a few paces, we heard a falsetto voice which made us turn our heads. It was the blacksmith singing. The last examination, Friday, 7th. This morning we had our oral examinations. At 8 o'clock we were all in the schoolroom, and at 1/4 past they began to call us, 4 at a time, into the big hall, where there was a large table covered with a green cloth. Around it were seated the principal and 4 other teachers, among them our own. I was one of the first called out. "Dear teacher, how plainly I saw this morning that you are really fond of us." While they were questioning the others, he had no eyes for anyone but us. He was troubled when we were uncertain in our replies. He grew serene when we gave a fine answer. He heard everything, and made us 1,000 signs with his hand and head, to say to us, "Good," "No," "Pay attention," "Slower," "Courage." He would have suggested everything to us, had he been able to talk. If the fathers of all these pupils had been in his place, one after the other, they could not have done more. I could have cried "Thank you" 10 times over in the face of them all. And when the other masters said to me, "That is well, you may go," his eyes beamed with pleasure. I returned at once to the schoolroom to wait for my father. Nearly all were still there. I sat down between Garron. I was not at all cheerful. I was thinking that it was the last time that we should be near each other for an hour. I had not yet told Garron that I should not go through the 4th grade with him, that I was to leave Turin with my father. He knew nothing, and he sat there, doubled up together with his big head resting on the desk, making ornaments round the photograph of his father, who was dressed like a machinist, and who is a tall, large man, with a bull neck and a serious, honest look, like himself. And as they sat thus, bent together, with his blouse a little open in front, I saw on his bare and robust breast the gold cross which Nelly's mother had presented to him when she learned that he had protected her son. But I must tell him sometime that I was going away. So I said, "Garron, my father is going away from Turin this autumn for good." He asked me if I were going also. I replied that I was. "You will not go through the 4th grade with us?" he said. I answered, "No." He did not speak for a while, but went on with his drawing. Then, without raising his head, he inquired, "And shall you remember your comrades of the 3rd grade?" Yes, I told him, all of them, but you more than all the rest. Who can forget you? He looked at me fixedly and seriously, with a gaze that said 1,000 things, but he uttered no word. He only offered me his left hand, pretending to continue his drawing with the other, and I pressed it between mine, that strong and loyal hand. At that moment the teacher entered hastily, with a red face, and said in a low, quick voice, with a joyful intonation, "Good, all is going well now. Let the rest come forward. Brave, boys! Courage! I am extremely well satisfied." And in order to show us his contentment, and to cheer us, as he went out in haste, he made a motion of stumbling and of catching at the wall, to prevent a fall. He whom we had never seen laugh. The thing appeared so strange that instead of laughing we were dumbfounded. All smiled, but no one laughed. Well, I do not know. That act of childish joy caused both pain and tenderness. All his reward was that moment of cheerfulness. It was the compensation for 9 months of kindness, patience, and even sorrow. For that he had toiled so long, for that he had so often gone to give lessons to a sick boy. Poor teacher! That and nothing more was what he demanded of us, in exchange for so much affection and so much care. And now it seems to me that I shall always see him in that act. When I recall him through many years, when I have become a man, if he be alive, and we meet, I shall tell him about that deed which touched my heart, and I shall give him a kiss on his white head. Farewell. Monday, 10th. At 1 o'clock we all assembled once more for the last time at the school, to hear the results of the examinations, and to take our little promotion books. The street was thronged with parents who had even invaded the big hall, and many had made their way into the classrooms, pushing up as far as the master's desk. In our room they filled the entire space between the wall and the front benches. There were Garrone's father, Dorossi's mother, the blacksmith Precossi, Cuore, Signora Nelli, the vegetable vendor, the father of the little mason, Stardi's father, and many others whom I have never seen. And on all sides could be heard a whispering and a hum that seemed to come from the square outside. The teacher entered, and a deep silence ensued. He had a list in his hand and began to read at once. Abatucci, promoted, 60/17. Arcini, promoted, 65/17. The little mason, promoted. Carassi, promoted. Then he read loudly. Ernesto de Rossi, promoted, 70/17, and the first prize. All the parents who were there, and they all knew him, said, "Bravo, bravo, de Rossi!" And he shook his golden curls with his easy and beautiful smile, and looked at his mother, who waved to him with her hand. Godoff, Godoni, and the Calabrian promoted, then 3 or 4 sent back, and one of them began to cry because his father, who was at the entrance, made a menacing gesture at him. But the master said to the father, "No, sir, excuse me. It is not always the boy's fault. It is often his misfortune, and that is the case here." Then he read, Nelli, promoted, 62/17. His mother sent him a kiss from her fan. Stardi, promoted, 67/17. But at hearing this fine fate, he did not smile, or remove his fist from his temples. The last was Bottini, who had come very finely dressed and brushed, promoted. After reading the last name, the master rose and said, "Boys, this is the last time that we shall find ourselves assembled together in this room. We have been together a year, and now we part good friends. Do we not? I am sorry to part from you, my dear boys." He interrupted himself, then he resumed, "If I have sometimes failed in patience, if sometimes without intending it I have been unjust, or too severe, forgive me." "No, no," cried the parents and many of the scholars. "You have ever been kind." "Forgive me," repeated the master, "and think well of me. Next year you will not be with me, but I shall see you again, and you will always abide in my heart. Farewell till we meet again, boys." So saying, he stepped forward among us, and we all offered him our hands. As we stood up on the seats and grasped him by the arms and by the skirts of his coat, many kissed him. 50 voices cried, "Farewell till we meet again, teacher. We thank you, teacher. May your health be good. Remember us." When I went away, I felt oppressed by the commotion. We all ran out confusedly. Boys were coming from all the other classrooms also. There was a great mixing and tumult of boys and parents bidding the masters and mistresses goodbye, and exchanging greetings among them. The mistress with the red feather had 4 or 5 children close to her, and 20 around her, depriving her of breath, and they had half torn off the little nun's bonnet, and had thrust a dozen bunches of flowers in the buttonholes of her black dress and in her pockets. Many were making much of Robetti, who had that day, for the first time, abandoned his crutches. On all sides one could hear, "Goodbye until next year, until the 20th of October." We greeted each other too. Now all disagreements were forgotten. Bottini, who had always been so jealous of Derossi, was the first to throw himself on him with open arms. I embraced the little mason and kissed him, just at the moment when he was making me his last hare's face, dear boy. I embraced Precossi. I embraced Garoffi, who announced to me the approach of his last lottery, and gave me a little weight of manjolica with a broken corner. I said farewell to all the others. It was fine to see poor Nelli clinging to Garrone, so that he could not be taken from him. All crowded around Garrone, and it was "Farewell, Garrone, goodbye until we meet again," and they touched him and pressed his hands, and made much of him, that brave, noble boy. His father was perfectly amazed as he looked on and smiled. Garrone was the last one whom I embraced in the street, and I stifled a sob against his breast. He kissed my brow. Then I ran to my father and mother. My father asked me, "Have you spoken to all your comrades?" I replied that I had. "If there is any one of them whom you have wronged, go and ask his pardon, and beg him to forget it. Is there no one?" "No one," I answered. "Farewell, then," said my father, with a voice full of emotion, bestowing a last glance on the schoolhouse. "Farewell," my mother repeated. I could not say anything. End of section 24. Recording by Kristin Lewis, Houston, Texas. End of Heart, a Schoolboy's Journal by Edmondo de Amicis. Translated by Isabel, Florence, HAPGOOD.